Chapter 533. Your information is really bad. Xiangyang district is a paradise. I heard that the merchants who went there to do business have returned. Many people want to move their families there. I heard that the land there is neat and tidy. It's clean even on rainy days. The houses are like heavenly palaces. The man described it in poor language, and what he said was what he had heard from the merchants. When Fengyi County was still in the hands of the Tsingyi army, the merchants still dared to do business in Xiangyang district. This in itself explained a lot of problems. What do you think Xiangyang district used to look like? It wasn't much better than here. In the hands of District Magistrate Lu Shi, it changed in half a year. Now that Cheng'an district, Maolin district, and Jiaoping district have all been conquered by him, these three poor places might become as good as Xiangyang district. What do you think? If I go for such a good opportunity, I might become rich. The person danced with joy as he spoke. In the end he sighed. Unfortunately, my wife and I won't allow it. Otherwise they'll fight with me. Everyone was discussing it. They were very curious about the Xiangyang district that the person mentioned. Most of them did not believe it. Upon hearing that, the boy's servant asked the strategist in a low voice in surprise. This Lu Shi, isn't he just a district magistrate? A district magistrate mobilized troops to attack the three nearby districts? Who would believe such nonsense, let alone to recover the lost land in Dongqing and save the people from suffering? A mere district magistrate actually had the ability and military strength to recover the three districts. From what he said, he even had the three districts in his pocket. He's ambitious and bold. The strategist took a sip of tea. He's an interesting person. The teacher had heard of Lu Shi, but Lu Shi, he had never heard of him. Would you like to take a look, sir? The boy servant asked. The teacher glanced at the boy servant amusedly and said, Didn't you say that you wanted to go to Diang district? As the master and servant were talking, they heard the person say in exasperation, What I said is true. Those were spread by merchants when they were doing business, who dared to go to Cheng'an district to do business in the past. Now they've all gone there and each of them has made a lot of money. The person in charge is said to be Wei Ci or something. He's a great beauty and does business logically. The attendant widened his eyes in astonishment. Mr. Zixiao? I don't think so. Maybe he has the same name, or maybe he got the wrong person. With Zixiao's personality, he doesn't seem to be the type to fall into a trap so quickly. The current situation in the world was still chaotic. With Wei Ci's complicated thoughts, he would most likely choose to observe for a while and wait for the true dragon. The page boy pouted and said, Didn't that person say she was a great beauty? The strategist couldn't help but laugh. I've taught you several times, but you didn't listen. Zixiao hates it when people talk about his appearance. The errand boy raised his hand and rubbed his chubby face. His appearance was mediocre. He really did not understand the mentality of those who wished to be ugly. I'm not allowed to say that she's beautiful. Then I won't say it in the future. The boy grinned. After a while, they listened carefully to that person's narration. The more they listened, the more they felt that the mayor of Cheng'an district was Wei Ci. The attendant said in a daze, Maybe it's really Mr. Zixiao? The strategist said uncertainly, Perhaps. The servant asked, Sir, why don't we go to Cheng'an district to look for Mr. Zixiao? The strategist was rather helpless. You're a man of your word. Since we're already at the border of Diang district, it's only a day's time. It's not a wasted trip to see Huangsong first. If you're not satisfied, we'll go to Cheng'an district to look for Zixiao. The master and servant drank their tea and returned to the carriage. The weather was still cold, and the people were still wearing heavy clothes. After the end of the spring plowing, there was a period of slack. There were not many people on both sides of the street. However, the closer they got to Diang district, the more lively it was. It looked a little like the leisure life of a farmer. This Diang district is peaceful. It seems that Huang something is quite capable. The servant drove the carriage, and the wheels of the carriage rolled slowly. The strategist clicked his tongue and did not make any comments. The master and servant found a quiet place and found that there were open tea houses and eateries on both sides of the street. The people who came and went had a slight blush on their faces. It was obvious that they were living a good life. The servant's impression of Huang Song increased gradually. The strategist's ears were filled with his servant's nagging, saying that everything was good, and that Huang Song seemed to be a good person. "You're very noisy," he said calmly. The servant retorted, "If I don't speak, you'll definitely say that the surroundings are too quiet again." Daily pitting master and servant against each other, January 1st, completed. He was mentally exhausted. Where had the reserved and obedient servant gone? The strategist found a seat in the tea house and asked the waiter some questions. Then he ordered a pot of ordinary tea. "Don't you think Diong district is good, sir?" The servant stretched his neck and looked out of the window. Ever since they entered the city, the scenery they saw was quite good. There were even children playing on the streets. "It's quite good. However, it was not good enough. Are you going to stay here, sir? Let's meet Huang Song first before making a decision." The strategist frowned, and information about Huang Song flashed across his mind. Since Huang Song and Feng Ju had caused a lot of trouble for Prince Changsho, Prince Changsho had investigated the identity and background of these two people. Huang Song was the godson of Huang Tan, who was a eunuch's descendant. His family background was a problem. However, he was not much better. Naturally, he would not be picky about his family background. As for his ability, the Diong district in front of him was the best evidence. However, he had to focus on this person's breadth of mind and bearing. After all, he was the one who had schemed to get Prince Changsho to frame Huang Song. How could Huang Song not bear a grudge and be disgusted? He did not want to be put in a difficult position. "How do we meet him?" The servant asked. "Hand over a visitation card and say that Yang Si, from Ding County at the border of Qinzhou, wishes to meet him." The servant exclaimed and said, "Sir, if we directly send a visitation card, he might not be willing to meet us." Yang Si said with a smile, "If Huang Song doesn't even know who plotted against him, there's no need to meet him. If Huang Song investigated him, he would naturally know who Yang Si was. Regardless of whether he flew into a rage or something else, he should at least meet him." The servant nodded in agreement and wrote a visitation card neatly. When the gatekeeper saw that the servant was dressed in rags and had countless patches on his clothes, he felt disdain in his heart. He took the visitation card unhappily. Without looking at the contents, the gatekeeper took it directly into the mansion. He did not put the card at the top. Instead, he squeezed it to the bottom. The visitation cards placed at the top were all from important people. After waiting for 3 days, there was still no news. Yang Si asked the servant to describe the situation that day in detail, and the servant said it aggrievedly. "How would he pay attention to you when you were wearing a set of patched clothes? I'm afraid this card won't even reach that person's table. Forget it, forget it. If we can't meet, then we can't meet. Pack up. Let's set off to find Zixiao. That person still owes your master a few strings of money. He hasn't paid for a few years. This time, we must get it back." Yang Si did not have any reluctance to leave, so he asked the servant to pack up and leave. The servant pulled the rug from under his feet. "It's not that Mr. Zixiao owes you. It's clearly that you compounded the interest, from a penny of buns to a few strings of money." Yang Si turned his head and scolded him softly. "No one will think you're mute if you don't speak." After the master and servant had been on the road for half a day, Feng Ju, who was already crazy busy, inadvertently flipped through the pile of visitation cards on Huang Song's table. Chapter 534. Seeing this visitation card, Feng Ju's heart surged with ecstasy. Ever since he suffered a loss at the hands of Prince Changsho, both he and Huang Song had noticed Prince Changsho's chief strategist, Yang Si. Yang Si was not well known. After all, to become an official or a scholar in Dongqing, there was a requirement for one's family background. People like Yang Si naturally belonged to the lower class. Therefore, Prince Changsho recruited him, which was why Yang Si went to him and was put in an important position. Unfortunately, Prince Changsho was not a wise ruler after all. Yang Si was soon given the cold shoulder. Feng Ju did not expect Yang Si's visitation card to appear on Huang Song's table. This meant that Yang Si had already left Prince Changsho and was currently without a master. If his lord, Huang Song, could recruit this person, it would be like adding wings to a tiger, and his foundation would be stronger. Although Diang district had not experienced war, this small county also had its own ecological circle. The forces between them were complicated. Huang Song had indeed put in a lot of effort to completely control these and become the veritable magistrate of Diang district. As soon as the situation stabilized, Feng Ju sent letters to his former classmates and friends. Now there were already many replies with good news. Unfortunately, they had not come over yet. There were too few people who could be used in Diang district. Now that Yangtze had come, and he was a genuine talent, how could Feng Ju not be happy? No one would complain about having too many talents, let alone Yangtze, who was a top-notch talent in a certain field. Feng Ju calmed himself down and quickly sent someone to invite Huang Song over. On the other hand, he carefully asked the concierge, "Do you know where the person who sent this visitation card lives?" Feng Ju glanced at the handwriting on the visitation card. It was well written, and did not seem to have been written by a treacherous person like Yangtze. He thought about it, and reckoned that this visitation card should have been written by Yangtze's boy servant on his behalf. The concierge glanced at the visitation card and was startled. He looked a little embarrassed and kept dodging Feng Ju's gaze. Feng Ju frowned and realized that there might be a twist in this. His heart skipped a beat, and he had an ominous premonition. He quickly asked, "Wait, how many days ago was this visitation card sent? Or, did you do something disrespectful to him?" How could the gatekeeper endure Feng Ju's increasingly imposing manner? He was so scared that he quickly waved his hands, but he couldn't say anything useful. The more Feng Ju looked, the more he felt that things were getting worse. He slammed his palm on the table, making a thunderous sound that made the gatekeeper's heart tremble. He said, "Tell me the truth, don't hide anything." The gatekeeper was so scared that he was trembling all over. Cold sweat flowed down his back in no time, drenching his clothes. He closed his eyes and accepted his fate. This card was sent here 3 days ago. I didn't disrespect that person. 3 days ago? Feng Ju widened his eyes and stared at the gatekeeper. His heart was burning with anger, and his right hand was clenched into a fist to prevent himself from losing his composure. "Tell me everything that happened that day in detail, word for word. Otherwise, you know the consequences." Feng Ju suppressed the raging anger in his heart and said to the gatekeeper, "Do you know what a big mistake you've made? I hope I can make up for my mistakes. Otherwise," in fact, even if the gatekeeper didn't say it in detail, Feng Ju could guess some of it. He was just flipping through the visitation card out of boredom. This card was placed at the bottom, but according to Huang Song's serious attitude in dealing with official affairs, it was impossible for him to pile up official duties. The only possibility was that the gatekeeper had made the decision to place this visitation card at the bottom. The gatekeeper knelt on the ground. When had he ever seen Feng Ju speak so harshly? In the past, this noble young master had always been gentle and dignified, with a lazy smile on his face. He treated people very well, and didn't put on airs. Now, he suddenly showed his imposing manner as a son of an aristocratic family. The gatekeeper was so frightened that he naturally said whatever he wanted to say. As soon as he finished speaking, Huang Song came in from the outside sleepily. Seeing the gatekeeper kneeling on the ground and trembling like a sieve, Feng Ju was still angry. He said, "Brother Ju, what big mistake did this little gatekeeper make you so angry? Don't be angry, I'll settle the score for you." Even though Feng Ju was full of anger, in the face of Huang Song's mischievous attitude, he suddenly couldn't get angry. He threw the visitation card in his hand into Huang Song's arms, pointed to the gatekeeper and said, "Take a look yourself. This wicked servant has ruined a lot of things." Huang Song was surprised. He had known Feng Ju for so long, and this person had rarely been angry. Once he was really angry, it was definitely not a small matter. Thinking of this, Huang Song quickly opened the visitation card. When he saw the name inscribed, his whole face twitched. The culprit who had once pulled him down from the position of colonel had actually come to send a visitation card? This feeling was really dreamy. However, Huang Song immediately realized that this was a good opportunity to recruit talents. Although he had many useful people under him, most of them were relatively mediocre, and top-notch talents were still scarce. Feng Ju had already written to his classmates and friends, but only a few of them replied affirmatively. Most of the others were taking a wait-and-see attitude. Of those who were willing to come, which one of them didn't come because of Feng Ju, Huang Song's favor of saving people during the earthquake in Dongqing, and the good reputation he had accumulated during the battle in Qinzhou? Otherwise, based on Huang Song's background alone, why would those nobles pay any attention to him? It wasn't that they looked down on Huang Song because of his background. It was just that Huang Song wasn't strong enough for people to ignore his background. Feng Ju's social skills were very strong. He had made a lot of friends when he was studying in the academy, and they maintained correspondence all year round. Therefore, Feng Ju could bring a group of capable talents to Huang Song. However, the current Huang Song was still too weak. If he was a little stronger, the number of people he could persuade would at least double. This Yang Si was the first talent who took the initiative to come to him. It was of great significance. Huang Song quickly asked the gatekeeper, "Where's the person who sent the visitation card?" The gatekeeper said with a bitter face, "I only know that they are staying at a guest house in the city, but it's been 3 days. I don't know if they're still there." 3 days had passed. Huang Song looked at the visitation card in surprise, then looked at the gatekeeper, and then looked at Feng Ju, who was still angry. Well, he could understand why Feng Ju was so angry. Feng Ju's temper was still good, and he always maintained the reserved demeanor of a son of an aristocratic family. If it were Huang Song, he would have kicked the gatekeeper to vent his anger. In fact, he did do that, but he controlled the strength of his kick, and did not kick the gatekeeper too hard. Lead the way. Although 3 days had passed, if they were lucky, the person hadn't left angrily yet. However, when they rushed to the guest house, the news they received was that the person had left the city at daybreak. "It's only been half a day, we can still catch up." Feng Ju resisted the urge to vomit blood. This gatekeeper was really tireless. Huang Song was also impatient. He took the reins handed to him by a servant, turned around, and got on the horse, ready to give chase. Feng Ju looked at the back of Huang Song's horse, and he felt like he was about to collapse. The talent who came to him was actually pushed away just like that. Chapter 535. The old horse pulled the carriage and walked leisurely. 1 step, 2 steps, 1 step, 2 steps. The pace was so slow that it made one sleepy. Although they had been walking for half a day, they were not too far away from Diang district. The boy servant sat outside the carriage and muttered, "Sir, what if the person in charge of Chungan district isn't Mr. Zixiao?" The boy servant asked worriedly. Yang Si lifted the curtains on both sides, and rolled up a book in his hands. The handwriting on it was delicate and powerful. Although it was not the work of a master, one could see the foundation of the handwriting. It had its own style, which was completely different from the boy servant's regular handwriting style. After listening to the boy servant's complaints, he said, "You're so unpredictable. If it weren't for my good temper, I don't know how much you'd suffer. You were the one who said you wanted to come to Diang district and Chungan district. Now, you're the one who doesn't want to go." The boy servant muttered, "I'm just worried. I ran into a wall in Diang district this time. What if I run into a wall in Chungan district too?" It was very dangerous to go out, especially when the situation in the north was unstable. There were conflicts between the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group everywhere. There were countless mobs who became bandits. The master and servant could arrive in Diang district safely, but it did not mean that they could arrive in Chungan district safely. Yang Si said, "You're worrying too much. Instead of worrying unnecessarily here, why don't you think about what to eat for lunch today?" "I refuse to eat dry food." The boy servant said with a bitter face, "You're still picky at this time. It's hard to serve you." The master and servant chatted again. After about an hour, the sound of hooves could be heard behind them. Yang Si frowned, and leaned a little closer to the window to take a look. He saw a young man in clean clothes galloping on a horse. From his appearance, he should be the son of a wealthy family. But at this moment, it was as if his buttocks were on fire, and he had an anxious expression on his face. Huang Song saw the carriage in front of him moving slowly. He suddenly pulled the reins, and saw a thin man sitting inside through the window. His cheeks were a little plump, and his eyes were gentle. His eyes were like dark deep pools, and his lips were naturally upturned. No matter from which angle one looked at him, he was an amiable man. He was far too different from the Yangtze in Huang Song's imagination. When he saw the young attendant sitting outside the carriage, dressed in old clothes full of colorful patches, he stared at him with wide eyes. "Hero W, what do you want to do?" The servant looked at the other party in panic, and tightened his grip on the horsewhip in his hand. When Huang Song saw the page boy, he couldn't help but think of what the gatekeeper had said. His eyes lit up as he looked at Yangtze in the carriage. He cupped his fists, composed himself, and asked, "Sir, are you Yangtze, Mr. Yang of Jiangding County?" The attendant looked a little surprised. Unfortunately, Huang Song's attention was on Yangtze, and he did not notice this detail. Yangtze put down the book in his hand, lowered his eyelids, and said with a natural expression, "My surname is Zhao. You've got the wrong person." Huang Song was disappointed. Then he apologized to Yangtze, waved his whip, and continued on his way. When he was out of sight, the page boy asked in a low voice, "Sir, that was—" Yangtze said with certainty, "Huang Song." The page boy was delighted, but he immediately withered. "Sir, why did you say that you're not him?" Yangtze said, "I'm not satisfied. This person is still too young and impulsive. I'm an old man who can't stand being tossed around." The page boy did not ask any more questions. If his master was not satisfied, then it was definitely not good. In fact, Yangtze was very satisfied with Huang Song's behavior of chasing after him. If Huang Song became more stable and mature in a few years, Yangtze felt that this person was indeed worth a try. He was able to disregard the past grudges and chase after him all the way. Just this action alone was more than 10 times better than Prince Changsho. Yangtze said, "Wait a few more years. This person might be a hidden dragon. Now, let's go to Chungan district to find Zixiao to collect our debt and freeload for a few years. If Huang Song doesn't become crooked, we'll make another trip to Diang district." Even if he left the mountain to look for a wise master, this was also about timing. He was indeed very satisfied with Huang Song. However, the timing was not right now. Naturally, Yangtze would not go back to him. The page boy was almost confused by his master, but he only needed to follow orders. Huang Song rode the horse and searched for an entire afternoon. There was no one who matched Yangtze and his servant on the road. When he thought about it again, he was immediately annoyed. That pair of master and servant was definitely Yangtze and his servant. When Feng Ju saw Huang Song return with a disappointed face, he asked about the situation and knew why Huang Song did not stop them. He sighed and said, "I'm afraid that Yangtze is angry." Huang Song felt uncomfortable and was quite critical of Yangtze's actions of playing tricks on people. He said, "Their carriage can't drive fast. If we send troops and horses, we can intercept them." Feng Ju frowned and said tiredly, "Forget it. The people's hearts are not here. What's the use of stopping them?" If the concierge had not caused trouble, Yangtze would have been taken in. Unfortunately, such a big problem had arisen. Among the truly talented people, which one of them wasn't arrogant and prideful? After being treated coldly for 3 days, Feng Ju would feel angry even if he were in Huang Song's shoes, let alone Yangtze, who had some grudges with Huang Song. Since Feng Ju had said so, Huang Song could only give up dejectedly. On the way north, the number of refugees they saw increased several times, but there was no despair or numbness on their faces. This surprised the page boy and Yangtze. After asking carefully, they found out that these refugees were rushing to Chungan district, Malan district, and Jiaoping district. They're recruiting people there now. 3 meals a day will be provided. At least they won't starve there. I heard that if they do well, they can even be promoted and rewarded. In the future, if they settle down in the county town, they can even get their own land and rent a house in the county town. Many refugees talked about this. In addition to some doubts, they were more hopeful about their future lives. Yangtze and his servant slowly rushed to Chungan district. From afar, they could see people working on the city wall. Even though it had been more than a month, they could still tell from the traces on the city wall that the tragedy of the siege had been. The page boy could not understand, but Yangtze found a way. There were many refugees waiting outside the city. There were 2 roads to enter the city. One was for the people in the city to enter and exit, and the other was for the refugees. The current Chang'an district was like a dance on the tip of a knife. Every step was extremely dangerous. The guards in the city were not as strong as what outsiders saw. If there were people with bad intentions among the refugees, they might cause trouble. Therefore, the screening of refugees entering the city was extremely strict. Even if they were refugees, the people in charge of the inspection were divided into two groups. One group was men, and the other group was women. The refugees had to queue up and be divided into two groups according to their gender for inspection, registration, and review. The page boy did not go to the group of refugees. Instead, he went to the tall city gate that was wide open. As expected, they were stopped. The page boy said, "My teacher and I are not refugees. We're here to look for someone." The guards at the city gate asked, "Looking for someone?" The page boy said politely, "The manager of Chang'an District, Wei Ci, Mr. Wei Zixiao." Chapter 536. Chang'an District was severely short of manpower. The guards at the city gates were all rotated between the male and female battalions. The guard who came forward to inquire was a female soldier. The attendant was a little slow to realize the gender of the guard, and he looked a little helpless. There was something wrong with Chang'an District. Why would they let a woman guard the city gate and let her be exposed to the elements? The female soldier did not know what the other party was thinking. She saw that the page boy was wearing old clothes that were full of patches. The horse that was pulling the carriage was an old horse that looked like it was about to die. The horse walked slowly, and the carriage was shabby and simple. They must have suffered a lot in Chang'an District. The female soldier felt a bit of pity and asked with a gentler voice, "Are you here to find Mr. Wei?" Seeing that the female soldier had a good attitude, the servant felt relieved. It was good that he could communicate. He was afraid that he would meet someone who looked down on him. "My master's surname is Yang, and his name is Si. He is a good friend of Mr. Wei. I wonder if this, young lady, could you help me pass a message?" When the female soldier heard that Yang Si was Wei Si's friend, she did not dare to slight him. She ordered the messenger to pass on the message, and then respectfully asked the page boy to drive the carriage to the side, so as not to block the people behind from entering the city. The servant was astonished to see the orderly scene at the city gate. "Sir, this place is interesting." It was the first time in his life that he had seen a female guard the city gate. Yang Si said, "It's indeed quite interesting, but it doesn't seem like Zixiao's style." He hit the nail on the head. This was indeed not Wei Si's doing. Wei Si's body was delicate and weak. Now that the seasons had changed, it was the season where it was easy to fall sick. He labored for a while before falling sick gloriously. In order not to be criticized by the audience in the streaming room, Jiang Pingji took the initiative to take over the miscellaneous items in Chang'an District. Wei Ci took care of things from the side. She reminded Wei Ci, "I say, with your body, you really need to take good care of it." Weak and sickly, he felt like a porcelain doll. Jiang Pingji had never been soft-hearted when she pressured her subordinates, but she could not bring herself to do anything to this sickly man. Fortunately, Wei Ci only had a low fever. After recuperating for a few days, his condition was almost healed. For the past 2 days, he had been able to help with official business. However, his lips were still a little pale. Coupled with his face, he was simply the standard of a sickly beauty. "Thank you for your concern, my lord. I will definitely take good care of myself in the future." Wei Ci agreed gently, as if he was to blame for falling ill and delaying his work. She was so considerate that the audience in the streaming room couldn't help it. They felt deeply that Jiang Pingji was shameless. It wasn't that Beauty Ci didn't recuperate. It was clearly that Chun Ke's work didn't give her time to recuperate. "You Tong, trash streamer, you bully my husband every day. My heart aches when I see you." Salted Egg Superman. Beauty Ci still values her health. She's very cooperative when taking medicine when she's sick. I felt bitter when I looked at the screen before. Who asked the host to not have a firm foothold? Even if he wanted to recuperate, he wouldn't be able to recuperate in peace, right? Yenrian, I think you guys should stop scolding the streamer. Let's just pick up our weapons and hit her. Shenjia, you all feel sorry for Beauty Ci, but I feel sorry for the streamer. She was a typical person who was tough on the outside, but soft-hearted on the inside. When Beauty CI was sick, she obediently took over the work. In the end, Beauty CI did not continue to be tired. Think back to the content of the live broadcast these days. It's all about the host handling documents in the government office. Looking at those flamboyant things, I always feel like I went to a fake school. According to Jiang Pengji's temperament, if she did not really sympathize with her subordinates, how could she stay in one place for a long time? She would have been so unrestrained that she could not be seen all day long, okay? Speaking of which, the streamer is very good to Beauty CI. Look at Feng Jin, Su Ku, Qiguan Rang, Meng Hun, Luoyue, and the others. They are all so busy. Have they ever seen the streamer being soft-hearted? It was not appropriate for Wei CI to waste his energy now, but he would carefully organize the bamboo slips according to the order of importance. The most important bamboo slips that needed to be dealt with the most were placed in a position that was convenient for her to reach. The slightly less important ones were placed in the first category. His expression was serious, and he was very meticulous in his work. Jiang Pengji picked up her pen to deal with the documents, annotated, or gave instructions. Occasionally she looked up at Wei CI. Wei CI noticed her gaze and asked in amusement, "Why are you looking at me like that, my lord?" Jiang Pengji said very honestly, "You're gentle and virtuous. If we were husband and wife in our previous lives, you would definitely be a good wife." Wei Ci's hand trembled, and the bamboo slips fell to the ground with a thud. He raised his hand to pick them up, but he accidentally touched the table. The bamboo slips that had been piled high fell into a pile. His face was pale and he lowered his head. He quickly picked up the bamboo slips and put them back in their original places. After a while, he pretended to be calm and asked with a pale face, "Why did you have such an absurd idea, my lord?" Jiang Pengji said, "I have some small habits when dealing with official affairs. I won't let people know unless they are extremely trustworthy." She had naturally experienced a lot of competition and tests to be able to climb to the pinnacle of power in the federal military from an ordinary genetic warrior. Not only did she have to guard against external enemies, but she also had to pay attention to internal abnormalities. Under such circumstances, how could her vigilance be weak? Wei Ci was quite familiar with Jiang Pengji's habits. If he had not spent a long time with her, it would have been impossible for him to know that. She had tested him a few times in the past. Now, she was just more certain of the guess in her heart. Wei Ci's lips moved. Jiang Pengji suddenly said, "It's just a joke. Zixiao, don't take it seriously." He only felt that his palms were soaked with cold sweat. The atmosphere in the government office was quite cold. At that moment, the arrival of the messenger broke the deadlock. Wei Ci secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He couldn't wait to get up and ask the messenger. His back view made it seem like he was fleeing. "What's the matter?" he asked. The messenger said, "There's a pair of master and servant outside the city. They claim to be your friends." After Chang'an district was conquered, Wei Ci drafted several letters, intending to lure a few friends over. However, he had been too busy recently and had a minor illness. The letters had not been sent yet. "Who is it?" "They claim to be Yang Si from Jiangding County," the messenger replied. "Yang Si?" Wei Ci's mind went blank for a second. Jiang Pengji's ears were very sharp. She asked, "Zixiao's friend is here?" Wei Ci's previous nervousness was swept away. Surprise surged in his heart. Even his voice sounded a little cheerful. "Yes, Jingrong is here." "Jingrong? He's from Jiangding County in Qinzhou. His name is Yang Si. His courtesy name is Jingrong." Wei Ci could not suppress the smile on his face. This person is a great talent. Jiang Pengji sized up Wei Ci's fragile little body. She asked calmly, "How talented is he?" Wei Ci did not know why. He said frankly, "I'm ashamed of my inferiority." Jiang Pengji crossed her arms and looked at him. She said, "I think Zixiao is better than anyone else." Wei Ci was speechless. Seeing that Jiang Pengji had returned to the table, Wei Ci was surprised. "My lord, aren't you going to take a look with me? They're here to look for you, not me. Why should I join in the fun? It might cause a misunderstanding." Chapter 537. Wei Xi said, I didn't think this through. Please wait for a moment, my lord. I'll go and welcome Jing Rong. Go and come back early. Jiang Pingji buried her head in the table. The tall pile of bamboo slips and documents drowned her figure. The messenger traveled quickly, and the news was not delayed. Yang Xi and his servant did not wait long outside the city. When Wei Xi arrived at the city gate, he saw Yang Xi sitting on the edge of the carriage, looking at the refugees in the queue with interest. Jing Rong, is it really you? Hearing the familiar voice, Yang Xi turned his head and saw his friend in heavy clothes. It made him feel hot just by looking at him. Yang Xi smiled and stepped on the stool to get out of the carriage. The two bowed in greeting. Zixiao, I'm here to seek shelter with you. I hope you can take me in for a while. Wei Xi was delighted. The smile on his face became brighter and more sincere. He hurriedly joked, You and I are close friends. There's no need to stand on ceremony. Not to mention for a while. Even if you're here for 30 to 50 years, I won't chase you out. A few female soldiers who were paying attention to the conversation secretly exchanged glances. They thought it was fake, but they didn't expect Yang Xi to be Wei Xi's friend. Listening to the conversation between the two, the female soldiers revealed a meaningful look that said, You know what I know. Yang Xi said bluntly, Wei Zixiao, what you said is fake. If you're here for 30 to 50 years, won't your future sister-in-law turn the world upside down? Nowadays, men were prevalent in the world. For the sake of family harmony, many men who were close to each other would consciously keep their distance. Otherwise, it might cause misunderstandings like the female soldiers. Other than facing Jiang Pingji, Wei Xi was quite open in front of his friends, especially people like Yang Xi who were not serious. He replied with a smile. To be able to have a friend like Jing Rong, even if I'm not married for 30 to 50 years, what's the harm? Yang Xi suddenly stopped smiling and shook his sleeves. I haven't seen you for a few years. You're getting more and more shameless. How can you say such things? Wei Xi glanced sideways. I'm not as shameless as Jing Rong. A beauty's every movement and frown were full of charm. Yang Xi felt that he couldn't stand it. The boy servant beside him looked at Wei Xi's face with infatuation. Seeing this, Yang Xi secretly hit the boy servant on the back of his head. Wei Xi was beautiful, but he was also black-hearted. Wasn't he afraid of being secretly plotted against by him? The two of them chatted for a while before Wei Xi took the initiative to welcome Yang Xi into the city. His attitude was warm and thoughtful, which made Yang Xi nervous. He had no choice but to be tense. How many years had he known Wei Xi? Once this fellow smiled like 100 flowers blooming, nothing good would come of it. The two of them were so intimate that the female soldiers guarding the gate quietly watched them leave. The page boy led the horse and followed behind them. The first female soldier said, Is that person Sir's wife? Female soldier B, Why do I feel that? Sir is more like my wife. When he entered the inner city, there were very few people in the surroundings. The houses were dilapidated and damaged, and it was a desolate scene. Yang Xi followed Wei Xi for a while before he saw that someone was tearing down the ruins. The surface of the ground was dug full of potholes. He collected his thoughts and asked Wei Xi seriously. When I first heard that the chief of Chang'an district was Zixiao, I thought it was just someone with the same name. After all, according to Zixiao's character, it was impossible for him to fall into the trap so early. The master you serve now is very ambitious. There was a faint smile on Wei Xi's lips. Yes, no one can be more ambitious than her. Yang Xi was puzzled. His eyes lingered on Wei Xi's face. He felt that after not seeing him for a few years, they were no longer friends. Wei Xi smiled and dispelled his doubts. Jing Rong should know my ambition. When I saw her, I knew that she could do it. She might be the only one who could do it. Since I've already met the right person, why should I care about whether the timing is right or not? A fine bird chooses a tree to nest in, and a virtuous minister chooses a master to serve. Since he had already met a capable person, he naturally had to seize the opportunity. Yang Xi knew Wei Xi's ambition. He said in astonishment, You're actually serious? My heart is like a stone, it can't be changed. He was so serious that he couldn't be more serious. Yang Xi was stunned for a while. He pointed at the scene of devastation and said, That's it? Are you sure? Wei Xi said. Within 3 months, Jing Rong just needs to watch. Who knows if the ruins today will become an existence like the capital? The more he said so, the more curious Yang Xi was. He said, just because of what you said, I have to freeload in your house for 3 to 4 months to see what this place can become. Wei Xi smiled meaningfully. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. He could drag Zhang Ping, who was in the hermit clique who was obsessed with his wife Crane, into the water. Could he not deal with Yang Xi? Zhang Ping was a person who didn't care about anything, but now he was ordered around until he was dizzy and disoriented. When he sent a letter a few days ago, he was still complaining that he hadn't had a good rest for a long time. Now he could sleep soundly as soon as his head touched the pillow. Yang Xi was different from Zhang Ping. It was too easy to drag him into the water. Yang Xi looked at Wei Xi's smile and shivered involuntarily. He felt some goosebumps on his back. He said rudely, "Don't smile, I get scared looking at you." Wei Xi listened and his smile grew. The pressure of the government office was basically piled on Jiang Pingji. Wei Xi, a patient who had just recovered from a minor illness, did not need to do much work. There were not many places to live in the district, and it was a comprehensive renovation. Wei Xi's residence was arranged to be in a house near the district headquarters. It was said that the previous owner of the house was a wealthy businessman. Later, his entire family was destroyed by the Tsingyi army. It was an ownerless property and was taken over by the public. Wei Xi brought Yang Xi and his servant into his house. He did not deliberately ask about their purpose in coming to Qingan district. It was just a normal visit. He understood Yang Xi. This person's style of doing things or planning was like a poisonous snake. He was patient, dormant, and killed with one blow. However, no one was perfect. Yang Xi's hobby was a fatal flaw. This person loved delicious food. He loved to eat, but he was picky. He was very picky. When conditions permitted, he would never eat vegetables if he could eat meat, and he would never drink soup if he could drink wine. Wei Xi had the experience of his previous life. He was very clear about how Yang Xi was tricked by Jiang Pingji. The black-hearted Jiang Pingji tempted him with delicious food and alienated the friendship between Yang Xi and his lord, causing a misunderstanding. It was fine if it happened once or twice. Yang Xi also explained clearly, but what if it happened more often? Many a little makes a mickle. Yang Xi's lord Huang Song was also quite suspicious by nature. He did not say it on the surface, but he must have remembered it in his heart. Yes, in his previous life, Yang Xi was defeated by his hobby of gluttony. In his previous life, Wei Xi and Yang Xi secretly reminisced about old times. This person hugged him and poured out his grievances, scolding Jiang Pingji. It was easy to change a leopard's skin. Yang Xi was defeated by his gluttony in his previous life. Naturally, he would be defeated in this life. In order to take care of Wei Xi, the patient, Jiang Pingji assigned him the chef she had trained in the district headquarters kitchen. One could imagine what the 3 meals in Wei Xi's house tasted like. Yang Xi would not stand on ceremony with Wei Xi at all. It was as easy for him to order Wei Xi's chef as if he was ordering his own boy servant. In just 7 or 8 days, the boy servant tragically discovered that his master's face had grown fatter. Chapter 538. Yang Xi's expression froze, and he glared at the boy servant fiercely. Don't say it if you don't know how to speak. Which boy servant bullied his master all day like this kid? The boy servant packed up the clean clothes, folded them neatly into the suitcase, and muttered, "Master is picky about food. He won't eat this or that. He won't stop until he gets what he wants to eat. I don't have the skills of a chef." Yang Xi was stunned and said matter-of-factly, "Then go and learn." The boy servant chuckled. "I also ate some. Such delicious food must be a family skill. Who would be willing to teach outsiders?" If that's the case, it makes sense. By the time Wei Xi returned, the moon was already high in the sky. Yang Xi squatted down to wait for him and asked, "Can your family's chef be sold?" Wei Xi asked in a puzzled manner. "You mean the residence's chef?" That person was specially rewarded by the Lord, because she sympathized with Xi's health. As long as it was a reward, no matter if it was a person or an object, It had a special meaning and naturally could not be sold. Yang Si said. Then can you let that chef teach my boy servant culinary skills? I'm afraid I'll starve to death if I get used to eating the food in your residence. Yang Si never hid his hobbies in front of his best friend. Eating was also a kind of art. Loving to eat was also a way to enjoy life. There was nothing to be ashamed of. Wei Si thought about it and said bluntly, You can, but the chef's main responsibility is to be in charge of the residence's 3 meals and teaching others culinary skills. I'm afraid this is not his job. If you want to learn, you need to pay for it. Talking about money hurt feelings, and talking about feelings hurt money. Whether it was Yang Si or Wei Si, both of them were not beautiful white flowers who didn't understand each other. Hurting feelings was hurting feelings, but money had to be talked about. Yang Si's entire fortune was just those 2 boxes of books and some small property. Based on his understanding of Wei Si, this person would definitely demand an exorbitant price. So he decided to strike first and gain the upper hand. Zixiao, have you forgotten that you still owe me a few strings of money? Just pay it off. Wei Si was stunned for a moment. When did he owe him money? Everyone knew that Yang Si not only loved to eat but was also stingy. He was not greedy, but the money that entered his pocket could not go out. Attribute Pitio. Yang Si rummaged through the old debts. The so-called old debts of a few strings of coins originated from a steamed bun worth 1 copper coin back then. Wei Si, sure enough, he still didn't know this friend well enough. How many strings of money could a steamed bun worth of a copper coin roll out of it? After thinking about it, he changed his words and said, All right, I'll return it to you. Yang Si was surprised. When did Wei Si become so easy to talk to? When it comes to craftsmanship, I think the small kitchen in the government office is the best. Why don't you send your page boy there to learn for a few days? Yang Si nodded in agreement. For a foodie, there was nothing more tempting than delicious food. Seeing Yang Si like this, Wei Si suddenly understood why Yang Si had been tricked so badly by His Majesty in his previous life. Serves you right. During the time when the page boy went to school, Jiang Pingji found that the food in the small kitchen of the government office was increasing. Even though she had a big appetite, she felt a little bloated after a meal. The key was that the taste of the food was a little heavy, which made her mouth dry. However, her stomach had no capacity. No matter how thirsty she was, she could only hold a mouthful of water in her mouth to quench her thirst. She could not swallow it. She called the chef over and asked. Only then did she know that the menu in the small kitchen was specially instructed by Wei Si. With this reason, Jiang Pingji waved her hand helplessly and sent the chef away. She said with a face full of affection, Let him be. Just as Wei Si expected, the page boy showed off in front of Yang Si after learning a little, which aroused the gluttonous worm in Yang Si's stomach. When he was working the next day, Wei Si heard Yang Si waiting outside. He looked up at the sky and knew that Yang Si had come over at mealtime. It was also a unique skill to freeload in such an elegant and refined manner. Because she was busy with government affairs, Jiang Pingji basically stayed in the government office. She also ate there. There were only the 2 of them in the originally simple and crude government office. Today, a young man with a little baby fat suddenly appeared. Her eyes drifted away and she ate her own food, ignoring the other party. Yang Si also ate as if there was no one else around. His appetite was quite good. In short, the atmosphere was a little awkward. Wei Si originally wanted to create an atmosphere for the 2 of them to talk. According to his lord's charm and enigmatic temper, the 2 of them would not immediately collude with each other, but at least they would hit it off. Now they had no intention of talking at all. Not only did the 3 of them feel that the atmosphere was strange, but the audience in the streaming room also noticed the clues. Chumlai. I came to watch the ruler and his minister eat. Why is there an awkward third wheel? Ku. Maybe it's a newly recruited talent? The streamer's territory is getting bigger and bigger now, and she needs more people. Kojiaoqi fan. The atmosphere is obviously not right. It feels like the 3 of them are eating on their own. They don't even make eye contact. Jiang Pingji was under a seal that said, My subordinate is sick, and I have to help him work overtime. For the next few days, the scene of the live streaming was in the small government office. The audience in the streaming room was a little tired of watching. The 3 mealtimes every day were their only fun. Watching the streamer and beauty CI eat. Many people could eat a few more bowls. After all, they were good-looking and had an appetite. Who could get used to the sudden appearance of a stranger Yang Si? For the next few days, Yang Si came to the government office to report for meals. At first, it was just 1 meal a day, then 2 meals a day, and finally 3 meals a day plus various snacks. Jiang Pingji was tired of watching it. She directly said to Yang Si, "Why don't you stay? It's quite troublesome to report every day." This was the first sentence she said to Yang Si. Wei Si was shocked when he heard this. His right hand, which was holding the brush, drew a long line on the bamboo slip. No, what was the difference between his lord's words and throwing people away? Recruiting a strategist could not be like this. Especially for someone like Yang Si who was very sensitive about his self-esteem. Such ambiguous words were a taboo. If this was said by a friend, it would at most be a joke. If it was said by a stranger, it would be very easy to be judged as mockery. Yang Si was a little unhappy at first, but when he looked up into Jiang Pengji's eyes, he realized that she did not mean to mock or disdain him. She was simply stating a fact. This discovery extinguished the flame that had just appeared in Yang Si's head. What if you don't want to? That's a pity. The food in the government office is only made from the materials that can be found around Fengyi County. It's poor in variety. Compared to delicacies, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Jiang Pengji continued. Moreover, if you don't want to, remember to pay for the meals for the next few days. Was he bullying her strategist with compound interest? If he didn't agree, he would be in debt for the rest of his life. Yang Si continued to look at her. And then, she said, if you follow me, you can eat all over the world in the future. If you don't follow me, try to see if you can walk out of this door. Wei Si's heart was like dead ashes. With his lord's temperament, it was no wonder that the talents in her previous life were all captured. Chapter 539. Jintian Wugong. I've lived for a long time, but this is the first time I've seen someone recruit a strategist like this. Streamer, even if you want to court death, don't do it like this. If this gets out, how can you hire employees in the future? If you can't hire employees who will work for you in the future, there's a limit to courting death. Yoguai. I'm thinking, if in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Liu Bei said to Zhuge that if you don't follow me, I won't let you go out of this door. Do you think there will still be a 3-way division of the world? Ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter. The streamer has a unique style. Ishibuzen. Although I'm very surprised, this is really in line with the streamer's temperament. It's something she would say. However, strategists in ancient society all have their own pride. With such a threatening method, the other party might not be willing to submit, right? With his life threatened, Yang Si might agree to the streamer's recruitment, feign civility, and then backstab the streamer when she's not on guard. The above viewer could be considered the emperor of truth. Didn't Yang Si trick his old master Prince Changsho? The key was that Prince Changsho only treated him coldly. He came and went at his beck and call without giving him any face or dignity. Jiang Pingji, on the other hand, directly threatened Yang Si's life. Comparing the two, it seemed that Yang Si would hate Jiang Pingji more. There were many onlookers in the streaming room. Except for a few people who could speak seriously, the others were all amusing. Gus Huiliunian, Tisk Tsk. You're still too young. If the streamer wins Yang Si over, she'll definitely throw a bunch of trivial official documents at him. She'll squeeze out all his human resources and make sure that he has no personal time apart from sleeping, eating, and going to the toilet. He'll be so busy that he won't be able to think about anything else. When the dust settles, it'll take at least half a year. Gus Huiliunian. Do you think it's possible for a person like the streamer to not win his loyalty in half a year? When everyone saw the bullet screen, they all sent a string of ellipses. It made so much sense that they were speechless. What Jiang Pingji needed the most now was people who could work. As long as the work was done, everything would be fine. Lao Siji Lianmeng. Haha, I haven't been in the streaming room for a long time. Actually, you don't have to worry too much. Strategists have their own temperament. Maybe the streamer's domineering style is more to Yang Xi's liking? After all, you have to believe that your host is not an ordinary person. Moreover, Wei Ci and Yang Xi were good friends. How could Wei Ci watch him cause trouble? It was true that Wei Ci could not watch Yang Xi plot against Jiang Pingji. But he also did not want Jiang Pingji to lay her hands on Yang Xi. If that was the case, who would dare to pledge allegiance to her in the future? Master! Wei Ci could not help but shout nervously when he saw the tense atmosphere between the two of them. Jiang Pingji ignored Wei Ci and continued. Sir, please don't think that I'm willful and overbearing. It's just that this is the government office. The documents that have been put aside are related to the lifeline of the district. The calamity of Fingyi County has just been settled. I don't want to attract unnecessary trouble at this time. Otherwise, Yang Xi would become one of them, and it would be fine for him to walk around the government office. Otherwise, in order to keep the secret, even if Yang Xi could leave the government office, he could not leave Qingan district. Yang Xi's expression did not change. Instead, he asked with interest, That's how you made Zixiao stay? He understood Wei Ci. This person would not join the world situation so early, let alone assist a young lad with a bad temper. He had been puzzled before, but looking at it now, he felt that he knew the truth. Jiang Pingji said narcissistically, Of course not. Zixiao admires my talent, and took the initiative to travel thousands of miles to look for me. Wei Ci looked slightly embarrassed. Yang Xi almost could not keep the expression on his face. He had seen narcissistic people, but he had never seen such a narcissistic and confident teenager. Yang Xi said bluntly, You're not the wise master I'm looking for. He even despised Huang Song for being too immature. He despised a willful and mischievous young lad like Jiang Pingji even more. Jiang Pingji also said, I didn't say that I want you to stay here forever. Yang Xi and Wei Ci were speechless. They looked at her in surprise. What did she mean? She continued, You've freeloaded so many meals in the government office these days. Doesn't your conscience hurt when you see Zixiao and I being so busy? You should at least help out and pay for the food, right? After you're done with your work, you can go wherever you want. I won't keep you. Yang Xi's face turned slightly green. So this person was just unhappy that he didn't pay for freeloading. So she asked him to be a part-time worker? Wei Ci secretly face-bombed. Forget it. He really couldn't expect his lord to take the normal route of being courteous and condescending to the wise to recruit talents. Yang Xi responded with an, Oh, and smiled meaningfully. It's not impossible for me to temporarily help you for a while by letting me come into contact with the government affairs of Qingan district. It's just, aren't you afraid that when I leave, the news will be leaked and it'll be disadvantageous to you? Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and said indifferently, When you leave, not only Fingyi County, but perhaps the entire Wanzhou will be in my hands. Her tone was flat, but Yang Xi could feel the irresistible and absolute confidence under her calmness. Young Langjun, you're so ambitious, Yang Xi said. Are you looking down on the royal family of Dongqing? At least Dongqing hadn't been completely destroyed. I heard that you used to work for Prince Changsha. Prince Changsha led his troops to besiege Qinzhou in the name of purging the emperor's corrupt officials. Don't you know what kind of scheme it is? Jiang Pingji said indifferently. As the old saying goes, it's better for the nobles and generals to have guts. Isn't it a matter of course that I, Lu Shi, can occupy the 4 districts of Fingyi County as the magistrate of Xiangyang district? At first, Wei Ci was worried that Yang Xi would really bear a grudge against Jiang Pingji. But as their conversation progressed, he calmed down instead. Yang Xi was very ambitious and restless. Jiang Pingji's arrogant and unruly character and style were to his liking. In particular, the phrase "it's better for the nobles and generals to have guts" hit Yang Xi's itch even more. In today's world, if one didn't have looks, family background, or fame, even if one was talented, it was still impossible to climb up. Yang Xi followed Prince Changsha's path to become an official. Wasn't it because he was unconventional and only used those who were talented? Unfortunately, Prince Changsha was just putting on an act. He didn't really care about his background. It was inevitable that Yang Xi would be at odds with him. Jiang Pingji was rather talkative. It's not just Fingyi County, Not just Wanzhou, not just Dongqing, not even just the 5 countries. As long as I can stand on my feet, I want to go. I can do what my predecessors can't. At that moment, the smile on Yang Xi's face was slightly forced. He said sarcastically, "Young Lang Jun, you only have Fengyi County, and there's still the Tsingyi army, and the Red Lotus group eyeing you covetously. Aren't you afraid that you'll cut your tongue by saying such big words?" Chapter 540. Well, yours, everything is yours. Yang Xi looked at the bamboo slips, which were almost as tall as a person, and felt a little depressed. He didn't know what had gotten into him just now. He agreed to be a part-time worker on a whim. What kind of part-time worker could come into contact with these messy, but important internal affairs? He turned his head and saw Wei Ci sitting by the tea stove, leisurely brewing tea and sipping it. Yang Xi raised his hand and pointed to the pile of bamboo slips that were as tall as a person. He asked with a grim smile, "Didn't you say you were very busy?" If such a tall pile of bamboo slips fell, the weight could seriously injure a person. He really did not know how a small Qingan district could have so many trivial matters. Yang Xi wanted to capture Wei Ci and interrogate him properly. Wei Ci pursed his lips and smiled shyly. He said embarrassedly, "I'm weak, I can't do it for a long time." Yang Xi secretly gritted his teeth. He sneered and said sarcastically, "It's fine if you lie to others, but you can't lie to me." What weak? Wei Ci's body was very weak, but it was not to that extent. "Jingrong, I really didn't lie to you. Last winter, I was trapped in the deep mountains. It was snowing heavily, and cold air entered my body. My body is not like before." Wei Ci still had a gentle smile on his face. His words sounded pitiful, but there was a hint of slyness in his eyes. "If you're too busy and fall sick, all the miscellaneous things in the government office will be piled on you. In this way, I can't bear to do it." "Can't bear to do it? Touch your conscience. When you said this, did you mean it?" Everyone knew each other well. Others said that Wei Ci was noble and virtuous, but he knew that this person was also full of evil tricks. "Every word I said, absolutely not a lie," Wei Ci said. Yang Xi chuckled. He no longer had the strength to continue to refute. He was really afraid that this fellow would really fall sick and fall sick. Then, the trivial matters of the government office would be piled on him. As for Jiang Pingji, after capturing Yang Xi as a free laborer, she was completely liberated from the government office. Yang Xi worked for 3 days in a row. He found that Jiang Pingji seemed to have disappeared from the world. Except for appearing on time at mealtimes, she was nowhere to be seen at other times. For lunch, Jiang Pingji carried a pile of bamboo slips into the kitchen as soon as the food was served. At this moment, Yang Xi realized that she was not wearing her usual wide-sleeved cloak. Instead, she was dressed in a neat brown dress. Her trousers were rolled up high above her knees, and her sleeves were rolled up, revealing most of her arms. Her feet seemed to have been soaked in the water for a long time. Yang Xi glanced at the bamboo hat on her head, and there was a strange look in his eyes. Such down-to-earth attire did not resemble Lu Shi at all. "Didn't they say that Lu Shi came from a noble family in Hejian County? Your Highness, see, I will help you." Wei Ci got up and wanted to help her take the heavy things. She looked at his body and walked around him. Quang! The bamboo slips were placed on the table, giving off a dull and loud sound. Jiang Pingji clapped her hands and said, "There have been more and more refugees entering the city recently. How's the progress of reclaiming the wasteland?" Wei Ci did not feel awkward and replied, "According to the plan, about 30% of the wastelands have been opened up. It is estimated that it will take another 2 months for the wastelands to be completely opened up. Every mu of land has been recorded, and it will be distributed after the household registration is completed." Hearing about the household registration, Yang Xi, who was at the side, really wanted to slam the table and leave. There were more and more refugees outside, which meant that the work of household registration would become more and more onerous, not to mention the subsequent sorting and induction. If something went wrong, it would be troublesome to deal with it again in the future. Even a person like Yang Xi could not bear it anymore. Jiang Pingji felt Yang Xi's resentment and said, There's no hurry, as long as it can be completed before spring plowing next year. The household registration is very important. It's fine to work slowly, but it's better to be slow than messy. Compared to this, I'm more worried that there will be a drought this year. Wei Xiai and Yang Si were both stunned. A drought? Jiang Pingji took a ceramic bowl, poured some cold water into it, and gulped it down. Yes, I've found a few experienced farmers. They also think that the weather this year will probably be hot and have little rain. Jiang Pingji judged based on her own experience. In addition, her brain was strong, so she could see details that ordinary people could not. However, in terms of farming, she still had to listen to the opinions of the old farmers. Combining the information from both sides, Jiang Pingji felt that this year was probably not good. The water conservancy facilities in Xiangyang district had taken shape. If they took good care of the crops in the fields and got through the summer, the autumn harvest this year should not be too bad. However, the situation in Chang'an district was different. There were not many crops, but more and more refugees gathered. They could not possibly not drink water for the whole summer, could they? She checked the files of the past and found a lot of things. It turned out that Chang'an district also had a few large-scale droughts. The fields were cracked, the rivers dried up, and the crops basically withered. Wei Xiai said, "If there's really a drought, I'm afraid the progress of reclaiming the wasteland will be delayed." After the Tsingyi army wreaked havoc, the spring plowing in Chang'an district was basically scrapped. There were basically not many crops planted this spring. If there was a drought this year, they did not have to worry about the crops in the fields. They only had to solve the water problem. It's okay, there's still a lot of time. Take it slowly. Jiang Pingji poured another bowl of water for herself. I've brought a few farmers to the nearby mountains to look for water sources these few days. I'm trying to see if I can open up a canal. It just so happens that Shiheng's water wheel can also come in handy. Zhang Ping, courtesy name Shiheng. Ever since he was tricked into the fire pit, that was Xiangyang district by his good friend Wei Xiai, his daily life had been very fulfilling. Hearing what she said, Yang Si secretly looked at Jiang Pingji's feet. No wonder her feet and calves looked pale from being soaked in the water. It turned out that she had gone deep into the mountains to look for water. The audience in the streaming room had been following the live stream. Naturally, they knew how long Jiang Pingji's feet had been soaked in the water. Their hearts ached when they saw it. Oh Huanggang Batsi. Streamer, if the drought this year is very serious, I suggest building a smaller reservoir to store water. Jiu Gao, get rid of me. Look at the situation now. Digging a reservoir is not something that can be solved in a few days. That's easy to say. Where is the most reasonable place to dig a reservoir? How is the best place to build a reservoir? These are all things that require knowledge. It's not something that can be solved just by talking. If the reservoir is not built well, it can't be guaranteed that one year there will be a flood, and the reservoir will collapse. When that time comes, won't those in a lower position drown? Ringkaching Huanda. TSK, then it's very reasonable for the streamer to prepare to dig a canal? Is it that simple to dig a canal? Chapter 541. Iduan Shoming Ruhu. It's good to build canals, but if there's really a drought, won't the water evaporate? Yikan Zhangjia 0 to 5. I think the streamer will think of a solution, such as sealing the canals to reduce evaporation. Although the audience in the streaming room was just chatting, and some of their suggestions were whimsical, Jiang Pingji did not ignore them. Instead, she picked up many ideas and remembered them. It was impossible to dig a reservoir, but it was possible to build a few small reservoirs. Fortunately, there were many refugees now. The construction of houses in Chang'an district could be delayed. The reclamation of wasteland could also be slowed down, but the reservoirs could be put on the agenda first. It would be best if there was no drought this year. If there was, they could at least guard against it. Wei Xiai saw her frown and sighed in his heart. He could not help but think of the old monk Liaochen's words. There were indeed many natural disasters in his previous life, but they were not as frequent as in this one. He didn't dare to think about how much luck that monster the old monk mentioned had stolen to turn the entire world into such a desolate place. Although the Lord did not say with certainty that there would be a drought this year, Wei Xi already believed it in his heart. Try to find underground water veins and dig wells. Anyway, these things have to be done sooner or later. Might as well do it all together. She seemed relaxed. Yang Si, who was beside her, could not help but chuckle. This person just moved his mouth, and the people below him ran errands. If he had known that eating a few meals would lead to such an outcome, he would probably still eat. For a person with a taste for delicacies, it would be a waste of a trip to the world if he had not tasted such delicious food. After all, the drought had not happened. Jiang Pingji wanted to bring people to dig canals, not only to prevent it from happening, but also to facilitate irrigation and water use for the people. It was best if the drought did not happen. If it did, at least they could survive it. Chungan district was close to the mountains, so there were many available water sources. Jiang Pingji led a group of experienced farmers to climb up and down, drawing the route of the canals day and night. She also asked some craftsmen from Xiangyang district to build a brick kiln near Chungan district. The bricks fired in the kiln were not used to pave the ground. The new bricks were wide and long, and the cross-section was lighter and thinner than the previous ones. It was a little troublesome to fire, and there were many inferior products. Jiang Pingji did not rush them. She just asked them to continue developing, and not to be afraid of spending money. She had plenty of soil, and the coal bought from Chengde County could be used until next winter. She was not afraid of squandering. Once Jiang Pingji became rich, even Wei Xi was afraid. Yang Si looked at the busy figures below the city wall. He could feel the bustling atmosphere from afar. He sighed. It's good to be rich. It's so much more convenient to do anything. If she had no money or food, Jiang Pingji would not have been able to attract so many refugees to work for her. Money was not omnipotent, but it was impossible to live without money. What surprised Yang Si was that when Jiang Pingji hired the refugees as laborers, she did not have any gender requirements, only the workload. Regardless of gender, the amount of food they received each day was the same. When he asked her why, the reason she gave him was irrefutable. Why don't you pay me the same for doing the same job? Whether it was moving bricks, digging canals, building houses, or repairing city walls, these were all extremely exhausting labor. Since the female workers who came to apply for the job could complete a day's work, they had to give her the food and pay she deserved. Wasn't this a matter of course? Not only that, the more he stayed in Chungan district and came into contact with the government affairs here, the more he felt that he had opened the door to a new world. A women's camp was actually established here. Wei Xi saw that he was surprised and explained calmly, "My lord is short of manpower. The combat power of the women's camp is not weak. In times of emergency, it's fine as long as it's a soldier." Yang Si did not believe Wei Xi's words. He said, "I think your lord has a big ambition. Normally, if there was no goal, who would let a woman come to the front of the stage for no reason?" Yang Si's intuition was sharp, but he still could not figure out the trick behind it. Wei Xi smiled. "In the future, she will also be your lord. You're confident." Yang Si did not think that he would truly acknowledge Jiang Pingji, even if her temper was indeed to his liking. Wei Xi smiled without saying a word. As time passed, the general outline of the buildings in the center of the district could be vaguely seen. The architectural style was the same as that of Xiangyang district. Yang Si had never seen something like green bricks. At most, he had heard about them from the refugees on the way here. Seeing that Chungan district was going to use green stones to pave the roads, green bricks to make tiles, and wide streets slowly taking shape in the ruins, he could not help but be speechless even though he was used to seeing rich people. Prince Changsha's mansion used jade as the steps and the tiles were gilded. This was very normal. He was a member of the royal family. However, Chungan district was just a small district. At its peak, there were only 18,000 households. Jiang Pingji was just an ordinary aristocratic family, but she could generously pave the main streets and lanes of the entire district with green bricks. She could also pave the newly built houses with green tiles. Yang Si did not dare to think deeply about how much manpower, material resources, and financial resources were needed. What made his heart beat faster was that Malan district and Jiaoping district were also in full swing. The progress was slightly faster than Chang'an district. They're really rich. Yang Si sighed. Wei Xi smiled and took out a glass tea set. He pointed at it and said, Jing Rong should say that the north borderline is really rich. Looking at Yang Si's eyes that widened in shock, Wei Xi smiled even more brilliantly. My lord did not rely on the power of her family. I don't know how much effort she has put in to get to where she is now. Although her temper is a little bad, she is indeed a wise lord who loves the people like her own children. Yang Si came back to his senses and swallowed nervously. His eyes could not help but drift towards the tea set. Previously, Prince Changshu had spent a lot of money to get a set of peerless treasures from the north. Yang Si was fortunate enough to see it once. The material was exactly the same as the glass tea set that Wei Xi took out. Prince Changshu's set was not as good as Wei Xi's. At that time, he was still lamenting that there was such a treasure in the world that was worth such a high price. Now, he felt his face hurt. Looking at Wei Xi's attitude towards the tea set, he knew that it was definitely not worth such a high price. These, could it be that your lord made them? Yang Si recalled the high price that Prince Changshu had charged. The corner of his mouth could not help but twitch. This was simply robbery. Yes, but she said that the market in the north borderline is temporarily saturated. There's no need to continue selling them. This year, she plans to let the caravan sell them to the 4 factions of Nanman, or to countries like Zhongzhou, Beiyuan and Xichang. At least, we can't bump into the north borderline, lest we get exposed. Yang Si stared at the cup in Wei Xi's hand. His slender and fair fingers pinched the transparent and resplendent cup. One could not help but lament that the years were peaceful. Nonsense. How much is this thing worth? Yang Si questioned closely. You'll only know when my lord becomes your lord. Otherwise, my lord will not let them go. There was a smile on Wei Xi's face. At this moment, there was a hint of slyness like a fox. Is freedom more important or curiosity more important? Jing Rong, you have to consider carefully. There's still a lot of work to do today. We were just talking about everything, and have wasted a lot of time. Wei Xi took a sip of tea faintly. Then, he went to his desk and continued burying himself in his work. Chapter 542. It had been 2 to 3 months since the spring plowing. The weather was getting hotter and hotter. The government office was open every day, but it still felt unbearably hot. Jiang Pingji did not have so many concerns at all. She wore a simple and light brown dress every day. Her sleeves were rolled up to her shoulders, and her trouser legs were rolled up to her thighs. Wei Xi blushed inexplicably at the sight of her fair arms and thighs, which attracted Yang Si's strange gaze. Do you have ulterior motives for your lord? Yang Si wrote with his right hand, while fanning himself with his left hand. Even so, he still felt that the clothes on his back had been soaked in sweat, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Wei Xi's hand trembled. A discordant black line appeared on the originally neat and beautiful letter. He reluctantly put away the ruined letter. He looked calm, but in fact, even his fingers were trembling. Jing Rong, what nonsense are you talking about? Xi and my lord are both men. Yang Si pursed his lips. Prince Changshu had reared many boys and male pets. This person did not hide it from them. Having seen the dark side of the aristocratic families, Yang Si did not think that they all believed in the way of yin and yang. Otherwise, how could men be so popular? So what if I'm a man? Speaking of which, Zixiao is 22 this year, right? There are no beautiful wives or concubines in the backyard. Even if others don't say that you have an unspeakable secret, they will think that you are gay. This is normal, Yang Si said with a smile. Looking at Wei Xi's change of expression in the hot summer, felt as carefree as drinking a large bowl of ice water in the dog days. It's not a big deal if you admire your lord, Wei Xi retorted. Jing Rong is 29 years old, but she's still single. Yang Si said, I have high standards and look down on ordinary women. In the past, matchmakers came to my house and broke through the threshold, but I was unwilling. Wei Xi choked and said, I have no intention of getting married. Yang Si saw that he looked a little worried, and his heart softened a little. He was afraid that he would touch on Wei Xi's sore spot. Are you still conflicted about that stupid 8 characters? At that moment, Jiang Pingji's voice suddenly came from outside the door. She said as she walked, "What stupid 8 characters? You're done with the government affairs. Why are you chatting so happily?" The corners of Yang Xi's mouth twitched. Jiang Pingji had gone to Jiaoping district a few days ago to catch able-bodied men. When Jiang Pingji entered the room, the two of them saw that she was carrying 2 round, green ball-shaped objects in her arms. Wei Ci saw the things in her arms and asked in surprise, "Verdant sect green jade room?" Yang Xi and Jiang Pingji were stunned. The audience in the streaming room was also stunned. A watermelon was a watermelon. What was the point of making it sound so artistic? Jiang Pingji did not know that watermelon had such a name, while Yang Xi had never seen a watermelon before. Wei Ci was stunned for a moment before he reacted. The watermelon, which was called the Green Jade Room by many aristocratic families who flaunted their culture, had yet to arrive from the western region. He remembered clearly that after the Jiang dynasty was founded, the small vassal states in the western region specially presented it to the emperor in order to please him. It tasted pretty good, and was a good thing to relieve the heat in the hot summer. Later on, it even became a treasure for the commoners to become rich. Why did it appear now? So it has such a name, but I call it watermelon. It's quite easy to grow. We can consider planting some in Chang'an district to store water and relieve the heat in summer. Jiang Pingji placed 2 large watermelons on the table, took out a dagger, and cut one of them in half. It had been chilled in the well water, and the flesh emitted cold air. I remember that this is only available in the western region, Wei Ci said. Jiang Pingji cut the watermelon. The bright red flesh of the melon made people salivate. It's indeed from the western region. Uncle Gu travels north and south to do business. He likes to exchange for some rare and strange plants. Last year he gave me some. I planted it in the small garden of the district headquarters of Xiangyang district. I heard that it bore fruit. I ate one, and it tasted pretty good. In fact, that was not the case. Jiang Pingji did not recognize the plants from ancient times at all. It was the audience in the streaming room, who grew watermelons at home, who told her about it. They taught her how to grow watermelons and things to take note of. After she memorized it, she passed the trick to the supervisor and let her take care of it. She went to Jiaoping district to handle some matters. When she heard Qiguan Rang's words, she hurried back to Xiangyang district and plucked a few and brought them over. Rare things were always expensive. Jiang Pingji wanted Fengyi County to recover quickly. The commercial development could not be weak. However, this kind of fruit could only be eaten to satisfy one's cravings. It could not be used as food. Even if it was planted, the quantity and the field had to be limited. If the commoners saw that growing watermelons was profitable, they all wanted to plant them. Who would plant food? What would they eat without food? Jiang Pingji thought about this, and served the watermelon on the plate to the two of them. Zixiao, you can't eat too much. This thing is cold in nature. Just eat 1 or 2 pieces to satisfy your cravings, she reminded him. Yuan Xiatiao. Seeing watermelon, I want to eat it too. It's a natural watermelon. It's juicy and sweet. I really want to go downstairs and buy one. Xing Dalao. I'm already holding half a watermelon. I'm eating it with a spoon. It's much better than eating it 1 piece at a time. The watermelons in the back garden of Xiangyang district were about 1.5 acres. She got someone to pluck them and send them to her subordinates as a reward. Holding a watermelon and nibbling on it in the summer could even improve one's irritation. Yang Xi despised Jiang Pingji, but he had to admit that the food here was delicious. Even the summer fruits were unique. My lord, I have already ordered the laborers to dig a canal and cut enough bamboo according to your instructions. I have sliced them and exposed them to the sun. How are the new bricks in the brick kiln? They can already produce excellent finished products. Although they are not as solid as ordinary bricks, they won't break easily. The 3 of them nibbled on the watermelon while talking about business. The scene was too beautiful. The audience in the streaming room expressed their desire for more. Tumi Dalao. Thank you, streamer. I think the melon farmers this year are going to laugh. Because of the mystery of the streaming room, and the gimmick of being able to cross dimensions, it led to many new industries. For example, watermelons appeared in the streaming room today. Perhaps the watermelons in the nearby fruit shops would be sold out. The effect of the advertisement was terrifying. Wouldn't the melon farmers laugh until their teeth could be seen? Jiang Pingji said. I'm very relieved that you're doing things. Bamboo slices were placed on both sides of the canal. The new bricks that were baked were used to pave the canal. Since the end of spring, the weather had become hotter and hotter. There had not been a single drop of rain so far. Jiang Pingji's premonition was about to be confirmed. During this period, Jiang Pingji had mobilized almost half of the manpower to dig canals, reservoirs and wells. Jiaoping District and Malan District were also extremely busy. Everyone was preparing for the upcoming summer. Although the construction of the district had slowed down, it did not stop. The barren district that had been ravaged by the Tsingy army began to exude an aura of prosperity. As long as the people's wills were united and their efforts were directed in one direction, almost nothing was impossible. Entering June, the weather was dry and hot. When the sun was strong, stray cats and dogs did not dare to stay outside for long. Chapter 543. The second prince's wife, Anyina, was the princess of the royal family of the 3 tribes in the northern borderline. She had married into the Dongqing royal family for the sake of the friendship between the 2 countries. Now that she had suddenly died and her body was buried in a hurry, it was a stark contrast to the scene when she had married into the royal family. The news was originally tightly covered up by the Dongqing royal family. However, Prince Changshu had planted a spy in Qinzhou, so he knew the news almost immediately. He was still worried that he could not conquer Qinzhou and ascend the throne. Anyina's sudden death was simply a stroke of genius. Prince Changshu almost could not hold back the ecstasy that gushed out from his heart. He could not stop rubbing his hands, and the smile on the corner of his mouth almost reached the back of his head. Is this news true? Did Anyina really die suddenly? He asked eagerly, but he secretly regretted it. Why didn't he think of using Anyina as a breakthrough point? If he had known earlier, he would have exposed the dirty things between Anyina, the 4th prince, Wu Majun, and the other ministers. It was a royal scandal. Not only did the princess and her uncle have an affair, but she also hooked up with so many important ministers. She should have been executed secretly long ago. Prince Changshu had some dealings with the northern borderline. The 3 tribes in the northern borderline gave him benefits and convenience. He used his connections to cover Anyina's actions in Dongqing. He promised her straightforwardly. No matter what Anyina did, it was transparent and open to him. Anyway, it was the emperor of Dongqing, not him. Prince Changshu was happy to watch a good show. Lu Shi, that coward, had not reacted to the death of his daughter Lu Huan. He did not even express any dissatisfaction with the Dongqing royal family. If Lu Shi could express some dissatisfaction and stand on Prince Changshu's side against the Dongqing royal family, Prince Changshu would have ascended the throne long ago. It was fine if Lu Shi did not help. Anyway, the battle situation had tilted in Prince Changshu's favor. As long as he waited patiently for a few more months, Qinzhou would collapse on its own. However, there was a major mistake on the battlefield at this time, causing the original advantage to be equalized by Qinzhou. The battle was in a stalemate. During this period, the troops in Qinzhou and Prince Changshu's troops had several battles and conflicts. However, both sides were in a stalemate, and no one could do anything to the other. Prince Changshu could only look at the emperor's throne in Qinzhou enviously. He was itching and scratching his ears and cheeks. They thought that the situation would continue. Who knew that Anyina, the princess consort, would die suddenly in Qinzhou? Anyina was the jewel of the royal court of the 3 tribes in the north borderline. She had died suddenly for no reason. Regardless of whether she had really passed away due to a serious illness or had other causes of death, the royal court of the north borderline would not let it go. This was also a good opportunity for Prince Changshu to seize the opportunity to gain the support of the north borderline. Prince Changshu's ambition was not small. All these years, he had a close relationship with the 3 tribes of the north borderline. If they were to cooperate now, they would definitely succeed. When the strategists and generals in the tent heard his idea, Their countenances changed, turning green or purple. It was very unsightly. A rather old strategist stood up and bowed. "My lord, you mustn't do this. The 3 tribes of the north borderline have been coveting the land of Dongqing for a long time. In recent years, their combat power has increased. If we choose to cooperate with them now, it is tantamount to inviting a wolf into the house. The danger is too great." The general sitting at the head of the table also said in a low voice, "Yes, my lord, you mustn't agree to this. The royal court of the north borderline had bad intentions when they married Princess Yaina into the royal family of Dongqing. These years, I have also heard rumors that this princess has taken in many guests. She is indeed a slut who has messed up the imperial court. The Count of Jinbei's residence was destroyed because of this slut. My lord, please reconsider." "My lord, I agree. At this time, my lord, please reconsider. Once this wild wolf from the north borderline is drawn in, it will be difficult to send it away. Think about how many people died with grievances when the 3 tribes of the north borderline ambushed Chongzhou Shangyu County. This blood feud, most of the strategists and generals in the tent had an extremely bad impression of the 3 tribes of the north borderline. This was only secondary. It was easy to invite them in, but difficult to send them away. Not to mention that the 3 tribes of the north borderline had been coveting Dongqing for many years. However, their opinions on this matter were not important. What was important was what Prince Changsho thought. Some officials who liked to curry favor saw that Prince Changsho looked unhappy and quickly stepped out. "Don't worry, everyone. This matter may not be entirely a bad thing," a middle-aged man in a scholar's robe said. Everyone glared at him. Only Prince Changsho's eyes brightened slightly. He stopped the people around him from scolding and signaled for the man to continue speaking. With Prince Changsho's approval, the middle-aged man felt more confident. He had always liked to act arbitrarily. In the past, he had pretended to be polite and listened to the opinions of others seriously, but it was just an act. Now that he was only 1 step away from the throne of Dongqing, he had been stuck at this step for nearly a year. He was already so irritable that he could no longer pretend. The middle-aged man did not have much ability, but he was extremely good at observing people's expressions. He could accurately hit Prince Changsho's pulse. "Continue speaking," Prince Changsho said. Everyone's face darkened. Only the middle-aged man's face exuded joy. He said, "The 3 tribes of the north borderline are barbarians. All of them are people who eat raw meat and drink blood. Dongqing is a country of etiquette, so it has the responsibility to educate them. They are merely barbarians. After my lord has succeeded, you can just give them some rewards and send them away. If you can't send them away, you can also make some verbal promises." Full of bullshit. Everyone's face turned pale. Coincidentally, someone with a more extreme temper stood up and scolded the middle-aged man, calling him a vermin. The middle-aged man smiled and said, "My lord is a real dragon appointed by the heavens. He is destined to rule the world. Borrowing the power of the north borderline is just following the will of the heavens. Promising some benefits to the 3 tribes of the north borderline is also to seek greater benefits. The land of the north borderline is the imperial land. Sooner or later, we can take it back. If we don't do this, do you have any other good ideas to successfully conquer Qinzhou?" Prince Changsho's face was calm, but his heart was already in turmoil. He was increasingly satisfied with and valued the middle-aged man. He wanted to promote him to the chief strategist and become the head of the literati in his tent. The middle-aged man continued, "Moreover, we can let the barbarians of the north borderline take the lead and deplete their military strength." Nonsense. There's no point in working with them. Many people still wanted to persuade him, but when they saw Prince Changsho's expression, their ambitions immediately sank to the bottom. Some hot-tempered people directly stood up and scolded. Not only did Prince Changsho not quell the dispute, but he also stood on the middle-aged man's side. This made everyone's heart turn cold. The hot-tempered and courageous generals directly stood up and waved their sleeves to leave the main tent. What kind of sh*t was this? Seeing that many people left one after another, Prince Changsho's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He usually pretended to be polite and open-minded, But it did not mean that these people could behave atrociously in front of him. However, he still had some rationality. He did not immediately agree to cooperate with the north borderline. Instead, he let the spies in Chinzhou continue to probe for information. Princess Enyina was fine. Why did she suddenly die? Chapter 544. How did Enyina die? Wuma Jun sneaked into the palace and ordered his trusted palace maid to pass a message to Hui Jun, asking her to come over. As soon as Hui Jun came over, he reprimanded and questioned her. Haha, what does it have to do with me how she died? If you're curious, you should ask someone else. Why would you ask me, a concubine in the palace? Hui Jun was dressed in a complicated palace dress. She was as beautiful as a painting. Even the fairies in heaven could not compare to her. She was like a delicate flower that became more and more beautiful. She could attract the souls of others just by standing there. Unfortunately, Wuma Jun was not in the mood to appreciate such beauty because he was furious. Wuma Jun had originally reprimanded Hui Jun. He wanted to hear the reason and find out more information. He did not expect her to say that. For a moment, Wuma Jun was so angry that his face turned red. He was so furious that he wanted to strangle Hui Jun. This solitude understands. You must have thought of a way to kill her, right? You ignorant woman. Do you know how important Enyina is? As long as this woman is alive, I can get the power in her hands and overthrow that old bastard. But you, Hui Jun sneered and said, although it's daytime now, it's better not to daydream. How can you be so sure that I killed Enyina without any evidence? She's the second princess, and I'm your father's favorite concubine. According to our relationship, I'm considered Enyina's elder. There's no conflict between us. Why would I want to kill her for no reason? Do you think it's because of you? Wuma Jun asked in return. Wasn't it because you knew about me and her and were jealous? That's why you killed her. Although he was completely despised by the emperor, and was even kicked in the chest by the emperor, causing Wuma Jun to lie in bed for more than half a year, Wuma Jun did not think that he had no chance to ascend to the throne because he had cooperated with Enyina and Prince Changsho. If he had planned it carefully, he might have already ascended to the throne. Who knew that bad luck would come one after another? First, Lu Huan gave birth to a pair of freakish babies in the palace. He was placed under house arrest by the emperor, and Lu Huan died from a hemorrhage due to dystocia. After Lu Huan died, he lost the support of the powerful Yu family. Then, Enyina died suddenly, which cut off his connections in the north borderline. Now, without the support of these two parties, how could he negotiate a deal with the sly old fox Prince Changsho? How could Wuma Jun accept that the throne, which had been within his reach, was getting further and further away from him? After thinking about it, he felt that Hui Jun had something to do with Enyina's death. Before Enyina died, she had entered the palace to visit the Empress. Then, she went to Huijuan's palace to talk to her for a while. After that she died suddenly that night. This was the information he could find out. Based on the news alone, Wuma Jun's intuition told him that the death of Enyina's wife was related to Hui Jun. That was why he took the risk to sneak into the palace, just to find out the truth. Hui Jun almost burst out laughing when she heard Wuma Jun's narcissistic words. Would she be jealous because of Wuma Jun and Frame Enyina? What kind of melodramatic drama was going on in this person's mind? You can think whatever you want. Enyina's death has nothing to do with me. If you don't believe me, then don't believe me. Hui Jun looked tired. She waved her sleeves and was about to leave. Wuma Jun was unwilling to let her go, so he was furious. In the end, he raised his hand and slapped her. An obvious five-fingered mark appeared on her fair and delicate skin. One side of her cheek was obviously swollen. Wuma Jun finally calmed down when he heard the loud sound and felt the numbness in his right palm. He slapped her so hard that Huijuan's face was slapped to the side. She felt a slight metallic taste spreading in her mouth. She stuck out her tongue and licked the blood at the corner of her mouth. She did not cry. Instead, she revealed a coquettish smile and said miserably, "You useless man. You said you loved me the most, but you framed me with a groundless crime for a dead person, just to appease the panic in your heart. Wuma Jun, you really have guts." She left angrily after she finished speaking. Wuma Jun was also shocked by his own actions. He stood rooted to the ground, and the look of despair and heartbreak in her eyes before she left echoed in his mind. He wanted to chase after her to apologize, but Hui Jun had already left. Oh no, I've hurt her this time. Could it be that she really didn't kill Inyina? Wuma Jun muttered to himself with a remorseful look on his face. Hui Jun, who had left sadly, had a cold expression on her face. She dabbed some cosmetics on her handkerchief and applied it to her face. She realized that her body had become exceptionally healthy after she entered the palace. Her skin was so tender that it was easy to leave marks, but it healed quickly. Wuma Jun's slap had indeed stunned her. Her cheek was swollen, and she looked very miserable. However, Hui Jun knew very well that this kind of injury would disappear in 15 minutes at most. It would heal faster if it was combined with medicine. Tizke, if Inyina didn't die, I would be the one who died. Hui Jun muttered to herself in the bronze mirror after she sent the palace maid away. A determined and vicious look flashed in her eyes. Why did Inyina die? It was because this woman had found out some information that she should not have. This information would cause Hui Jun to die a tragic death. Hui Jun was born in the slums of Shangjing. She was just a lowly prostitute who could be bullied by everyone. The Lu residents helped her conceal her identity. Logically speaking, it should be foolproof. However, Inyina seemed to know about the past. Thinking of this, Huijuan's face darkened. She recalled that day. Now that she thought about it, she still felt resentful. Inyina entered the palace to talk to the Empress for a while with the excuse of congratulating the Empress on the Thousand Autumn Festival in advance. Then, she went to Huijuan's palace. The first sentence she said made Huijun extremely frightened. Fortunately, she could control herself and did not show any unusual expression. Inyina said, I know that you're just a lowly prostitute in Shangjing. Huijuan's heart trembled, but she responded with a smile. What do you mean, Your Highness? I'm innocent. When did I become a prostitute? In fact, Inyina did not have any concrete evidence. She knew some secrets, but she was not sure. Therefore, she chose this opportunity to trick Huijun. However, Huijuan's reaction was too normal, which made Inyina uncertain. She said, I'm afraid the imperial noble consort doesn't know yet, right? Your face is exactly the same as that of an imperial noble consort many years ago. The emperor doted on you so much because of your face. The imperial noble consort was extremely beautiful, but unfortunately, the heavens were jealous of her beauty. She died of illness at a young age. The emperor was heartbroken and ordered to collect beauties who were somewhat similar to the imperial noble consort in order to remember her. All the officials from all over the country offered their gifts. Among them, there was a woman who looked very similar to her. However, this woman already had a husband and was 3 months pregnant. Inyina smiled meaningfully when she said that. Huijuan's expression had already changed slightly. Chapter 545. Inyina continued. This woman was originally an ordinary village woman. In order to please the emperor, the local officials killed her husband and sent her to the palace when she was pregnant. Because of her face that resembled that of the imperial concubine, she was pampered by the officials for a period of time. Unfortunately, she violated a taboo and tried to compare herself to the late imperial concubine Wang. She died mysteriously. Along with the baby girl who was born in the palace, both mother and daughter disappeared. However, the information I found is more than that. Is Imperial Gui Fei in the mood to listen? Huijun suppressed the restlessness in her heart and tried her best to calm her expression. This story is interesting. Tell me about it, Princess Consort Inyina. I've been very bored these few days. It's good to kill time by listening to it. Her reaction was very calm, and there was not a single flaw in her. The more she was like that, the more suspicious Inyina became. I spent a lot of effort and finally found the palace maid who served that woman back then and asked for some information. Inyina said sarcastically, that woman broke a taboo and tried to compete for favor with imperial consort Wang. So she was detested by the officials. The emperor felt that this person was insatiably greedy and was not qualified to be compared to the high and mighty Guifei. So he threw her into the slums and demoted her to a prostitute. That woman became a prostitute. Every day, she had to welcome and send people off. How pitiful. Her daughter followed in her footsteps. Poor mother and daughter. Huijuan's heart trembled. She had already guessed what Enyina was going to say. However, she knew that if she admitted to this matter, she would probably die miserably. Therefore, Huijuan's expression was natural. She used a handkerchief to wipe the tea stains at the corner of her mouth and said elegantly, "It's indeed a story that makes one weep. Is the princess consort here to warn me not to overestimate myself and compete for favor with the late imperial consort Wang? Or could it be that he wanted this consort to know that his status was only because of his face, that he was favored by the officials? If that's the case, then I appreciate it." Although Enyina did not name anyone, she knew very well that the story was very likely to be true. Huijun was miserable, but she still had a gorgeous smile on her face. Enyina tried to probe her a few times, but she fended them off easily. Enyina had no choice but to ask meaningfully, "Imperial noble consort, do you know where that woman's daughter went?" Huijun said, "Since she's a low-class prostitute, she must have been tortured to death by others." Enyina secretly hated Huijun for her flawless defense. However, she did not have any concrete evidence and could not control Huijun. Enyina valued her influence on the emperor. If she could control Huijun, it would be easy to overthrow the entire Dongqing plan. The princes were already locked in a fierce battle, and Prince Changsha was still eyeing them covetously outside. If the emperor were to suddenly die at this time, Dongqing would fall into complete chaos. When their internal strife was almost over, the cavalry of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline would lead their troops to the south. They would be able to conquer Dongqing effortlessly. After Enyina left, Huijun sat on the spot for a while and ate 2 abortion pills that she had secretly hidden. She was pregnant very early in the month. As a prostitute, she had a few accidental pregnancies and was forced to abort by her mother several times. She had long been infertile. However, ever since Lu Shi's Langjun performed the celestial technique on her, her body was getting better day by day. Her yin and yang were harmonized with a man's. Instead, it was like using yang to nourish yin. Her damaged reproductive organs had also recovered. A few days ago, she found out that she was pregnant. Huijun was very ruthless. She had never thought of giving birth to a child for the emperor. After listening to Enyina's story, it was even more impossible. Therefore, Huijun had a miscarriage. The reason was that she had eaten the snacks sent by Princess Enyina, which were mixed with a large number of abortifacients and blood circulation substances. The emperor was furious when he heard the news. "Perhaps, the princess is worried that I'll give birth to Lin and obstruct her husband's path to power," she complained tearfully. The emperor was used to seeing her arrogant side, but he had never seen her so weak and pitiful. She felt pity for Enyina and the second prince, and she hated them to the core. Huijun insidiously provoked the emperor's most sensitive nerves. He was old, and his children coveted the throne. Now, he could not even tolerate the blood in the belly of the favored imperial noble consort. If that was the case, Enyina would not have died a sudden death. Huijun added fuel to the fire and revealed the filthy relationship between her and the 4th prince. She said, "The second princess sees me as a thorn in her side. I'm afraid she's worried that I'll spill the beans in front of the emperor and expose the illicit relationship between her and the 4th prince." The emperor was a typical example of, only the officials were allowed to set fires, but the people were not allowed to light lamps. He could fool around in chaos, but others could not. That night, Enyina died a sudden death. It was not that the emperor had not thought about the reaction from the north borderline, but it was nothing compared to his majesty as the emperor. The royal family of Dongqing wanted to hide the news, but they could not stop Prince Changsha from hindering them. The news of Enyina's sudden death quickly spread from Qinzhou. At the same time, a letter on a horse galloped north from Prince Changsha's military camp. It was already midsummer when the news reached Jiangpingji. It was the hottest time of the year. She slightly lowered the recruitment standards and took her time to recruit soldiers. The female battalion was further expanded, and the number of soldiers reached 5,000, while the male battalion had 15,000. There were a total of more than 20,000 soldiers in the male and female battalions, which was not considered weak among the forces in the north. At the same time, she and a few strategists slightly improved the previously discussed method of farming. The original purpose of the method of farming was to deal with the problem of excess captives. There were not many captives at the moment, but the food shortage was imminent. After a few discussions, they decided to put the first batch of farming experimental plots in Chungan district for trial. The reason was simple. There was a lot of wasteland near Chungan district. The terrain was stable and open, and the built canals were relatively complete. If it was used as a trial experimental plot for farming, the effect would be better. For this reason, Jiang Pingji even transferred Li Yun, who was an expert in farming from Malan district. Because of the reservoir, canals, and a few newly dug wells, Chungan district was not very short of water. Li Yun rolled up his trousers and held a ceramic bowl to drink water in big mouthfuls. The cold water vapor slightly dispelled the high temperature caused by the exposure to the sun. When I went to see the fields today, a part of them split open. Fortunately, my lord has foresight. Otherwise, I don't know if I can drink water. After being exposed to the sun for a whole day, Li Yun's skin, which had taken a lot of effort to maintain a fair complexion, turned a few degrees darker. Yangtze sighed faintly. Fengyi County is fine, but the people in other places, I'm afraid they'll have a hard time. In this world, whether the people can live a good life or not depends on what kind of local officials they encounter. Jiang Pingji's personality was terrible, but Yang Si had to admit that with her around, the people's lives were indeed much better. Li Yun nodded in agreement. He wore an expression that said, "My lord is the best." Chapter 546. Yang Si snorted. Women should just stay at home and take care of their husbands and children. Why should they go to the battlefield? There are men who protect the country. In my opinion, it's better to take advantage of this incident and disband the women's camp. If people don't appreciate it, it's because they don't know what's good for them. It wasn't that he looked down on women, but he felt that the world was already very difficult. There was no need to treat women so harshly. Li Yun shook his head disapprovingly and said, I don't agree with Sir Jingrong's words. Just as my lord said, it's precisely because the world is difficult that people can't even take care of themselves. That's why women need to step forward. Whether it's to take care of their husbands and children, or to protect the country, it's a personal choice. Some people like embroidery needles. Naturally, there are also people who like to be armed and don't like to wear makeup. It should be respected. Yang Si's eyes slanted, and he glanced at Li Yun. This naive idiot talked about these things clearly and logically, muttering endlessly. Yun feels that my lord is doing the right thing. It's better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish. Instead of thinking of ways to protect women like fragile glass, it's better to teach them how to protect themselves. In today's world, many people can't even take care of themselves. How would they care about women who are seen as weak in the eyes of others? Hearing the word glass, Yang Si couldn't help but think of a day when his student servant accidentally broke Wei Si's glass teacup. That thing was indeed very fragile. Rationally, Yang Si agreed with Li Yun's words. There was indeed nothing wrong with it. On his journey from the south to the north, he saw too many refugees. He saw a husband forcing his wife to become a prostitute, ignoring her cries and collecting money from passers-by. As long as he paid, he could do whatever he wanted with his wife. He saw a father selling his young daughter to a slave trader. His daughter cried at the side, and he fought with the slave trader just to get a few more copper coins. He saw a man trading his children for food, exchanging his daughter with others in exchange for human flesh to satisfy his hunger. The world was very unfair to people, and it was even more unfair to women among them. Yang Si shook his head and sighed. Your lord is a person who has tender and protective feelings for women. But he continued, this is how the world is now. Even if your lord's intentions are good, the people are ignorant and stupid. They only have benefits in their eyes and greed in their hearts. Just like this time, wasn't your lord summoned back in a hurry because of this trivial matter? Jiang Pingji established the women's battalion. The female soldiers could receive salaries. She opened a nursery and took in girls and babies who had been maliciously abandoned by their families. How many lives had she directly or indirectly saved? Would the world be grateful to her? In Yang Xi's opinion, that might not be the case. She was probably going to get herself into trouble. Li Yun was disappointed, but there was nothing he could do. The people of the world are all fools. Bickering with a bunch of people who are as stupid as insects is really asking for trouble. Yang Xi said sarcastically. Female soldiers have already violated the customs and are inferior to male soldiers in all aspects. I really don't know what your lord is doing with this. He's doing this for the good of these female soldiers. But are they and their families willing to accept his kindness? At this moment, Jiang Pingji was facing a group of insects in Yang Xi's words. There were more than 10 people kneeling before her. There were boys who were less than 6 or 7 years old, and above them were old women who were in their 50s or 60s. Behind them were 2 neatly dressed female soldiers. Their heads were lowered, and their expressions were blank. Jiang Pingji remembered these 2 female soldiers. A while ago, when the military camp was rewarded, and the soldiers who performed well during the siege were promoted, these 2 female soldiers were among them. One of them was promoted to a centurion, while the other was in charge of the trivial matters of the logistics and medical troops. She was also an official. Coincidentally, these 2 female soldiers were beautiful sisters. According to Jiang Nongqin, these 2 were quite talented. She was preparing to train them well and promote them in the future. This time, she hurried back because of these 2 women. Jiang Pingji had already understood the situation when she arrived. Her gaze swept over the few people who looked somewhat mean. You said that you want to take your daughter back and not stay in the women's battalion? She asked. The oldest woman said, Yes, I pity my granddaughter. She's old, and it's time for her to get married, so that it won't be delayed. Jiang Pingji snorted and said, But I remember that these 2 sisters were the first batch to enter the women's battalion. At that time, there was a lot of discussion in the county. The people said that the women's battalion was a camp for prostitutes. You sent them here and beat and scolded them on the way. Aren't you ashamed to say this now? The old woman's face froze. She never expected that the district magistrate did not respect the old and cherish the young. She directly tore off the skin of their faces and threw it on the ground. What was the difference between this and pointing at someone's nose and scolding them? Filial piety is the most important of all virtues. This old woman is their grandmother, Jiang Pingji said coldly. I remember that I set up a law. Even if they are biological parents, they have no right to force their children to be prostitutes. There was a hint of killing intent in her eyes. Just by sitting there, she gave people a great deal of pressure. The audience in the streaming room also understood what had happened. They could not help but sigh. They felt sorry for Jiang Pingji and looked forward to the development of the plot. In this era, filial piety was more important than anything else. The streamer supported the female soldiers in the women's battalion. To a certain extent, it was against filial piety. Their families wanted the female soldiers to go back to get married and have children. If they did not go back, it would be unfilial. Jiang Pingji knew to respect the old and cherish the young, but she would not give face to others if they were shameless. Don't say such empty words. Do you really think that I don't know what you are planning? Don't you see that your 2 daughters are promising? So you want to cling to them and suck their blood? Don't think that I don't know that you have taken away their salaries. Touch your conscience. Do you have the cheek to ask for this money? Forget it. They are just jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards. They are just animals. How can they be considered humans? She scolded the people below her mercilessly and changed to a more comfortable position. This time, I came to get my daughters married. How can it be a good marriage? Isn't it just for the betrothal gift of a dozen taels? If I marry my daughters at a high price and accept the betrothal gift, and my daughters have a promising future in the military camp, I won't do anything because of filial piety. Instead, I will continue to pay them every month. 2 daughters, one is a centurion, and the other is a medical officer. Their salaries are not low, and they will be higher in the future. You guys are really good at scheming. What pity that their daughters or granddaughters were old, and no one wanted them. It was just for a dozen taels of silver. As the saying goes, one should not hit people in the face, and one should not expose people's shortcomings. Jiang Pingji stepped on where it hurt. Old woman. The woman kneeling below her wanted to speak, but Jiang Pingji said impatiently, "Shut up. You have no right to speak here." Her good mood recently had been ruined by this family. It would be strange if she had a good temper. She turned her gaze to the two female soldiers and said, "Do you remember that before you entered the women's battalion, you signed a document?" The two female soldiers said, "I remember." Chapter 547. The two female soldiers were a pair of sisters. The older one was 17, and the younger one was 15. Apart from them, there was a 7-year-old brother. After the earthquake last year, Xiangyang district was in the midst of reconstruction. To save some food, the family wanted to sell their two older daughters to a brothel. However, Jiang Pingji was renovating the place at that time. She was in a tight spot, and they had no place to sell their daughters, even if they wanted to. Later, they heard that sending their daughters to the women's camp would give them half a tael of silver as compensation, so they sold their daughters. With 1 tael of silver for the two daughters, the family could save 2 mouths to feed. As for their future, even though their mother was worried, she did not dare to show any abnormalities with her mother-in-law watching over her. Later, the two filial daughters secretly gave their monthly salary to their mother, hoping that she could hide it as her private money. That way they could speak confidently at home. However, the mother had always liked to please her husband and mother-in-law. She would spill everything once she opened her mouth. Now, one of the two daughters was promoted to a centurion, and the other became a small leader of the medical troops. Their salary was also doubled from before. The family boasted about it everywhere. Very soon, a matchmaker came to propose marriage. The betrothal gift was very high. The engaged husband was in his early 30s. 2 wives had died. He had 4 children, and his family was somewhat wealthy. He despised the women on the battlefield, but he liked the status of the female soldiers in the women's camp. He felt that it was easier to talk to someone in the army. As long as he could help his family, he would marry him and treat him like a god of wealth. The two families hit it off. Then, they made a scene at the women's camp. They wanted to drag their daughters back to get married. Jiang Nongqin stopped them and sent an urgent letter to Jiang Pingji at the same time. Perhaps it was Jiang Nongqin's rather good attitude that gave the unruly people confidence. They were also unreasonable and rude when facing Jiang Pingji. However, Jiang Pingji was not so easy to talk to. She immediately retorted. Her murderous aura alone was scary enough. Jiang Pingji chose to ignore the unruly people in a noble and cold manner. She had mixed feelings about the female soldiers. "Tell me your choice." The older female soldier bit her lower lip. Her gaze was evasive. She stammered, "I'll listen to you." Although the district magistrate promised that the female soldiers could set up a household after they retired at the age of 24, and that their children would follow their mother's surname, there was no such thing. Her mind was a mess, filled with the bombardment of words from her father, mother, and grandmother a few days ago. As soon as he said that, the viewers in the live stream exploded. Sang K. What the F***CK? There's something wrong with this person's brain. She's willing to marry a man who's old enough to be a father. Moreover, he's an old man with 2 dead wives and 4 children. Even the host said that he would support them. F***CK. Saipu. My lungs are going to explode. Do they not believe in the host? If I were a streamer, my heart would turn cold. Meow meow dadatu. Don't be so angry. What's the use of scolding them? If it were me, I would go up and slap them. Akateris. Bah! Do you still remember how the host trained those female soldiers? You're still beating people up? Be careful not to be killed instead. Xianyuejidia. I can't take it anymore. My heart is about to collapse. Why doesn't the lady soldier want to believe in the streamer? Kneeling begging for monthly tickets. This is like stabbing a knife into the host's heart. She's now preparing to reveal her identity in the future. She has to vigorously support the female soldiers and let them walk on stage. Now, the lady soldier slapped the host in the face. This is too much. Jiang Pingji was not as upset as the viewers in the live stream thought. In fact, she was very calm. Yes, she was too calm. Feng Jin looked at Jiang Pingji worriedly and sighed in his heart. If the women's camp was not Jiang Nongqin's territory, he really wanted to overstep his authority and solve this problem before Jiang Pingji returned. He understood her temper. She would not be at a disadvantage at all. If she suffered a small loss, she would definitely seek revenge 1,000 times over. Jiang Pingji calmly moved her gaze away and fell on her younger sister. She asked, "What about you? Like your sister?" This female soldier was a centurion. According to Jiang Nongqin, she trained very hard every day. Others were resting, but she was still training. During the siege, her arm was shot by a stray arrow. She gritted her teeth and pulled the arrow out. She stopped the bleeding hastily and continued to fight. She was very stubborn. Jiang Nongqin secretly wanted to train her as the deputy captain of the women's camp. The female soldier looked at Jiang Pingji anxiously. Her grandmother secretly stared at her, as if she could eat her up. I don't want to marry and have children like my sister," she said in a panic. Didn't the district magistrate promise that female soldiers can retire at the age of 24? Their household registration will be independent, and their children can follow their mother's surname? Therefore, I don't want to marry. Compared to being pinched by her grandmother at home, she preferred to fight with knives, spears, swords, and halberds. Only then did she feel that she belonged to herself and was free. Jiang Pingji suddenly smiled and said, "I know. I will naturally do what I promised." "You wicked girl. Are you trying to anger me to death?" The old woman ignored the situation and reached out to pinch the girl's waist. She had thick and long white nails. If she pinched her flesh, it would be extremely painful just thinking about it. Pa! The transparent glass was thrown to the ground. The broken pieces splashed all over the ground. The old woman was so shocked that her eyelids twitched. Jiang Pingji turned her head and asked Feng Jin, "What's the punishment for attacking a soldier in public?" Feng Jin answered, "She should be flogged 3 times. Jiang Pingji said, "Yes, write it down." She waved at the young female soldier and gestured for her to sit in the lower seat. Jiang Pingji said calmly, "A country has its laws and a family has its rules. The military camp is a place of strict discipline. You know what kind of place the women's camp is. When you send your daughter here, do you remember to sign a document? The document clearly states that female soldiers under the age of 24 are not allowed to get married or get pregnant. Those who violate this rule and incite them to do so will be flogged 100 times and executed in public. If a female soldier insists on marrying, she will be expelled from the military and will never be employed again." This time, the faces of the people who were kneeling below changed. The older female soldier's face was even paler. "As for you, you're very good. You didn't disappoint the captain of the women's camp." She looked at the younger female soldier. "You've reminded me of something. It's true that I've neglected this matter. You're not even 20 years old. It's still a bit early for you to get married. However, the matter of the household registration should be dealt with. From now on, all female soldiers in the women's camp will have their household registration removed from their original household registration and set up their own household." In Jiang Pingji's eyes, people were people. As long as they could be used, it didn't matter if they were men or women. In her eyes, those who could not be used by her were no different from trash. Jiang Pingji said coldly, "Huayu, execute according to the contents of the contract for the women's camp. There's no need to talk nonsense with them." Feng Jin sighed. He knew it would be such a situation. Not to mention 100 floggings. The bodies of these people would suffer from 12 floggings. He said, "Yes, my lord. I just don't know who is the main instigator." Chapter 548. Who was the instigator? Whoever dared to stand up and admit it would be punished with 100 strokes. Wouldn't they be crippled if they were hit? It would be fine if they were crippled, but they might lose their lives. For a moment, The blood drained from the faces of the people kneeling below. Except for the 7-year-old boy who still looked confused, everyone else was sweating profusely and trembling. The old woman's eyelids rolled back, and she fell to the ground, looking like she was out of breath. Feng Jin was surprised. Feng Jin was astonished. If this old lady was really scared to death, it would definitely affect his lord's reputation. The old woman's son, daughter, son-in-law, and daughter-in-law all looked distressed and panicked. The whole hall was noisy. Jiang Pingji leaned against the table and watched the emotional performance of these people coldly. The audience in the streaming room was still filled with righteous indignation. But after the old woman fainted, someone jumped out to accuse Jiang Pingji of being cold-blooded. Loli Wan Sui. Oh my God, someone is going to die. Although this family is indeed a bit outrageous, isn't there something wrong with what you're doing, host? If you really scared someone to death, let's see how you deal with it. A bunch of cold-blooded animals. San Nian Xingjing. The values of this streaming room are so bad. There are violent and bloody elements. Why hasn't the country banned it yet? Sampai Shidiozo. It can't be banned. It's being streamed on all online platforms. It's as pervasive as a virus. Unless all the streaming platforms are closed and the internet is cut off, maybe this streaming room can be completely banned. But do you think that's possible? Death sentence Bugue. TSK, this streaming room is so bloody. Minors can't control themselves and commit crimes after watching it. They want to teach bad things to children. If one day someone really commits a crime according to the streaming room's practices, it'll be too late. It wasn't the first time Jiang Pingji had been cursed by the audience for 18 generations. She didn't care. Their mouths belonged to them. She couldn't control what they wanted to say. If they could really face her ancestors, who would dare to open their mouths and say a word? She sneered and asked them in return. Host V. I think death sentence is not a bad thing. This person has taught me how to write erotic stories about Lolis. Why did you rape a girl? She could remember clearly which ID had said what, and when in her live broadcast room. Jiang Pingji mercilessly dug up the audience member's past. Trying to play double standards with her? He had to make sure that he was clean first. Some of the viewers in the streaming room criticized her, but most of them supported Jiang Pingji. After all, they were old viewers who had followed her for many years. They knew that Jiang Pingji would not speak without thinking. Moreover, this matter was related to the dignity of the women's camp. If they didn't handle it well, and didn't follow the rules of the military camp, who wouldn't come over and drag their daughter away to get married? More importantly, was this marriage really for his daughter's sake, and not to sell her for a good price? In short, Jiang Pingji was setting up a female battalion, not a premarital training class for unmarried women. If he wanted to take advantage of her, he would have to see if his body could withstand 100 beatings first. The people below rushed to the old woman's side and wept bitterly. The older female soldier was horrified. The fear and worry of being expelled from the army were also suppressed. She was more worried about the old woman's safety. If something happened to her grandmother, wouldn't the family blame her? Just as her parents said, they were her blood relatives. They would definitely do it for her own good. Why would they harm her? Feng Jin looked at Jiang Pingji awkwardly. The younger female soldier was also very flustered at first, but she calmed down very quickly. She was used to seeing this grandmother act shrewdly and make jokes. If she couldn't make a fuss, she would pretend to faint. The word unfilial could break a person's spine. Looking at her face, it was rosy and clean. Where was the paleness and weakness that a fainted person should have? My lord, this, Jiang Pingji snorted. It seems that no one will stand up and admit that they are the instigators. Then I will judge. This boy is only 7 years old. I think he can't instigate his elder sister, so he will be exempted from the punishment. This old woman is really hateful. She doesn't educate her children strictly. 10 beatings. The others will share the remaining 90 beatings. Drag him away to be beaten. That female soldier will be expelled from the army and will never be employed again. She pretended to faint in front of her. She thought she was blind. The old woman still did not wake up. She said, "This old woman tried to attack the soldiers before. She should be punished with another 3 beatings." In addition, She pretended to faint in front of me. That's another crime. She should be punished with another 10 beatings. There will be a total of 23 beatings. Just do as you see fit. Don't be frugal. Feng Jin said, Yes, my lord. He called the guards outside the door and dragged the people away to be punished with beatings. The older female soldier resisted subconsciously. Fortunately, the guards were prepared, and she was the first one to be dealt with. Even so, one of the guards' arms was injured. Jiang Pingji snorted mockingly when she saw the situation. What's the use of being strong in martial arts? She's already so cowardly. It's no wonder that anyone can step on her. The older female soldier's martial arts were not weak. She could at least deal with 3 to 5 strong men. However, when her family forced her to marry a man who could be her father and become the stepmother of a man who was older than her, she still agreed miserably. Jiang Pingji was not very kind. She gave them a chance, but they did not appreciate it. No matter what happened to them in the future, they should not blame her. The old woman was dragged out by the guards. She finally could not pretend anymore. She kicked her legs and cried, rolling on the ground. The audience who spoke up for the old woman felt their faces turn red. It was not because they were embarrassed, but because they had been slapped in the face. The older female soldier tried to kneel down to plead for mercy and appease the old woman. Instead, she was slapped on the face, leaving 5 bloody marks. As mentioned before, the old woman had thick and long nails. She did farm work all year round. Her strength was greater than many young and strong men. Even though the female soldier was well trained, she was slapped and rolled on the ground. Her right cheek quickly swelled up. Even her teeth were loose. You jinx! God damn it, someone's going to die. You're riding 1,000 men. You're king with 10,000 men. If I knew you were such a rotten thing, I should have fallen to my death as soon as I was born. Ouch. Old man, why did you go so early? You left me alone to be bullied by these animals and women whose conscience has been eaten by dogs. The older female soldier opened her eyes wide in astonishment. She could not believe that these words came from her grandmother's mouth. The old woman refused to get up with all her might. She kept cursing and swearing, and everyone felt that her words were dirty to the ears. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and touched her forehead. She said coldly, Take her away. Don't show any mercy. Flog her as many times as you deserve. The group of guards heard the anger in Jiang Pingji's tone. They secretly cursed the old woman for asking for trouble. Then they each took one side of her and dragged her out by force. The old woman also tried to scratch the guards' arms with her nails. Soon a few bloody marks were left. The guards grimaced in pain. They did not know how an old woman, who was almost 50 years old, could have such great strength. Chapter 549. My lord, you're really naughty. Feng Jin was speechless, but he couldn't do anything about it. After all, only when his lord was happy could the people under her lead a happy life. I know that gossip is a fearful thing. Beating an old man will attract criticism. However, the rules of the military camp are like this. If I show mercy today, will anyone be able to come and make trouble? Old people should be more reasonable. Should I indulge such shameless old people? Feng Jin naturally knew the importance of punishing the chicken to warn the monkey. If he didn't get rid of the stick that stuck out, it would be difficult to clean up in the future. Jiang Pingji glanced at the younger female soldier. Seeing that she was a little worried, she felt even more satisfied. She said, You should be glad that you and your sister made a completely different decision. Otherwise, the rest of your lives will be over. Seeing that Jiang Pingji was talking to her, the female soldier quickly restrained her worry for her sister. She lowered her head to the Lord and listened attentively. The audience in the streaming room came back to their senses and understood the other meaning of Jiang Pingji's words. Hide and seek, cat baby. I just remembered that this family obviously doesn't treat this pair of sisters as family. They treat them more like goods. Thinking about the old woman's curses just now, it's not an exaggeration to say that they're enemies. Just as the streamer said, so what if they have fighting skills? The female soldier's skills to resist the guards were really beautiful, but her heart collapsed and she couldn't stand up at all. Now that she's been removed from the military and will never be employed again, the family will torture her. Fortunately, her sister is smart and not stupid on Hoenn City. To be honest, I'm quite unhappy with this female soldier's behavior. The streamer said that she'll support her. She should know what kind of people her family is, but she still chooses to be submissive. According to this development, I think her ending won't be good if she goes home and marries someone. How can it be good? The husband's family saw her position in the military camp and married her to be useful. Now that she's been removed from the military, she'll become an ordinary civilian. This marriage will definitely fall through. Even if it doesn't fall through, and she marries into someone else's family, she'll be tortured to death. Twilight sunset. That's why the streamer said that the younger sister is smart and not as stupid as her sister. His younger sister was still in the military camp, and she was still a centurion. Although she was not a high-ranking official, it was already very powerful for ordinary people. With her younger sister supporting her in the military camp, no matter how difficult her life at home was, she should be able to survive. If her younger sister was also stupid, hee. The viewers in the live stream knew what he was going to say even without him saying it. If her younger sister did the same thing and was removed from the military, she would lose her position as a centurion. When they returned home, they would just be obedient daughters who should be unconditionally filial to their families in the eyes of others. Their families would do whatever they wanted to them, including buying and selling. He recalled how the old woman had scolded her granddaughter. He directly said that his granddaughters were used by thousands of men. What kind of good ending would they have when they returned home? Only then did the young female soldier understand the deeper meaning of Jiang Pingji's words. Her eyes were slightly red, and she was worried about her sister's future. Jiang Pingji saw through her and said, "If you're really worried about your sister, try your best to do your part. The stronger you are, the better off she will be at home. If you're not strong enough to make your family flatter you, she'll only be humiliated." The female soldier bit her lower lip and plucked up her courage to plead for her sister. "My lord, my sister is actually—" Jiang Pingji interrupted her and said, "In the face of such a situation, the smartest thing to do is to remain silent. This is the best for your sister. The women's battalion is indeed a little rebellious in today's world. It's not tolerated by the secular world." The female soldier lowered her head even more after hearing that. As the first batch of female soldiers in the women's battalion, she had also experienced the days when she was ridiculed and misunderstood by others. Jiang Pingji acted as if she did not see her reaction. If you want to really stand up and let the women's battalion be accepted by everyone, you can't even take a wrong step. If I side with your sister, what will happen to the rest of the women's battalion? The military camp is a place where words are final. If orders are changed all the time, what will become of it? Don't think that only your family is the smartest in the world. Who knows how many people are secretly scheming the same thing as them? Do you know what it means to kill a chicken to warn the monkeys? Your sister and your family are chickens that will be slaughtered to warn the monkeys. In other words, if Jiang Pingji could not handle this matter perfectly, the women's battalion would really become a premarital training class in the future. Of course, she suddenly laughed. The coldness in her tone made one's hair stand on end. If you don't control yourself and lose your mind, you'll also be among the chickens that will be slaughtered. There are many talents in the world, but there are only so many opportunities. There are too many monks and too little porridge. If your sister doesn't want to seize the opportunity, naturally, there will be others who will covet it. Do you think I'm right? The female soldier listened and broke out in a cold sweat. It was still midsummer, where it had not rained for a long time, but she felt as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. At the same time, a sense of relief rose in her heart. According to her understanding of those relatives, if the two sisters did not have anyone to rely on, they might really be driven to death. However, when she thought of her sister, who was supposed to be in high spirits, she could not help but feel sad. On the other side, the family put on a good show. The old woman had to endure 23 strokes of the cane, but when she saw the wooden stick that carried out the punishment, she almost fainted from fear. Because the punishment was carried out in public, there were naturally many onlookers. It was said that the family of the female soldier wanted to take their children back to get married. But due to the original contract, if they wanted to do so, the instigator would have to suffer 100 strokes in public, and the female soldier would also be removed from the military. This made many people's hearts tremble. Just as Jiang Pingji said, the family of the female soldier was not the only shrewd people in the world. Others more or less began to have ideas about their daughters. So what if they entered the women's battalion? They were still their children. If their parents asked their daughters to get married, would they dare to rebel? However, when they heard that the punishment was 100 strokes, and that the girls would also be removed from the military, many people gave up on this idea. If they were removed from the military, they would lose money. It would not be enough even if they paid for it. How could they help their families? Not to mention the 100 strokes of the cane. After a dozen strokes, they would go to hell. Everyone cherished their lives. Who would dare to commit a crime against the law? The onlookers gave up on the idea of tricking their daughters, but they did not stop watching the show. Some even boasted that they were smart and were proud of themselves. If they did not resist the greed in their hearts, they might be the ones who would be stripped of their pants and thrown on the ground to be spanked. When the old woman saw this scene, she knew that she could not escape today. She cried, made a fuss, and screamed. She pinched her granddaughter's arm with her right hand, almost twisting a piece of her flesh off. When the bystanders saw that the area quickly turned purple and black, they could not help but rub their arms. Oh my, the strength! Is she an enemy? Chapter 550. After beating her granddaughter, the old woman vented her anger. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were dusty from rolling on the ground. She cried to the guard who was carrying out the punishment, "Sir, how can I take 23 strokes? Old man, why did you leave so early?" The guard spread his hands helplessly, with an expression that said, "I can't make the decision. The Lord also said that your son, daughter, son-in-law, and daughter-in-law can take the punishment on your behalf." The expressions of the old woman's children changed. The two daughters-in-law shrunk their necks, and the son-in-law looked up at the sky. The few of them had shared out the 90 floggings. If they were to share out the old woman's 23 floggings, would they be able to survive? The old woman was reminded by the guard. She pointed at one of her daughters-in-law and said in a sharp voice, "It's all because of you. You gave birth to 2 losers, and brought so much trouble to the whole family. You take the punishment, or I'll ask my son to divorce you." The woman who was pointed at turned pale, and her body was on the verge of collapse. At this time, the female soldier, who was beaten, finally regained her senses. She sneered and said, "My mother has a child in her belly. She can't take the punishment. Grandma, didn't you say 2 days ago that my mother was going to give me a younger brother? You know she has a child in her belly." The guard was surprised and looked at the weak woman with shrunken shoulders. If she is pregnant, she can't be beaten. In other words, there was one less person to share the 90 strokes. The old woman had to find someone else to take the 23 strokes. The old woman's face turned red. The discussions of the onlookers came into her ears. What a vicious old woman. She knows that her daughter-in-law is pregnant, but she still wants her daughter-in-law to take the punishment for her. Tisk tsk. I'm her neighbor. We live in the same courtyard. I didn't expect this family to be so unreasonable. I heard that their 2 daughters are in the women's camp. One is more promising than the other, and their monthly salary is subsidized to the family. Their family lives are the best in the courtyard. I was so envious of them. Looking at it now, this family didn't have any good fortune. The daughter is trying to climb up, but the whole family is holding her back. Old shrew. She's so vicious. Isn't she afraid of getting even with the king of hell? If my daughter is so good, I'll wake up laughing in my dreams. It's a pity that he's a sickly invalid. How can he go on the battlefield to kill the enemy and make contributions? Some people just don't know how lucky they are. They don't know how to cherish the blessings that others can't ask for. It's really unfair. Tisk tsk, you guys don't understand. This was called being short-sighted and blind. You can only see that your daughter can be sold at a high price in exchange for a hefty betrothal gift. but you can't see how much benefits your daughter can bring to the family in the future. You're so short-sighted, tsk. During the previous siege, regardless of whether they were deployed to fight in the war or stayed behind to defend Xiangyang district, the female soldiers who performed outstandingly and made contributions were all rewarded. Some were promoted in status, while others were rewarded with money. The two female soldiers in this family had both. When the news came out, many people were envious of them, but the family just had to seek death. Some smart and quick-witted people would call their daughters dearly and try their best to repair their blood relationship, hoping to get the protection of their daughters. Only such a stupid and greedy person would do something as stupid as killing the goose that laid the golden eggs. The old woman heard the people around her discussing. All of them accused her family of being greedy and stupid, but no one stood up to speak for them. She was stunned and her mind went blank. When she heard others say that they were short-sighted, she cried even harder. We're also blinded by lard. We're all deceived by the black-hearted Iceman. The old woman opened her mouth and was ready to push the blame to the matchmaker. It was the matchmaker who instigated them to harm their daughter. However, everyone knew in their hearts that if this family was not greedy and black-hearted, how could the matchmaker persuade them? The guards were already impatient, and the surrounding people jeered, wanting to see them beaten. The family was scared and panicked. The father of the female soldier raised his hand and wanted to beat his wife, who asked this woman to give birth to two scoundrels. One side of the female soldier's cheek was already swollen, and her arm was covered with black and blue pinch marks. She looked very pathetic. Seeing that her mother was about to be beaten, she raised her hand to stop her father's raised arm and pinched the vital part of his wrist. This would make one's bones hurt. I'll bear the punishment for mother's punishment. The others will be punished according to the rules. Her mind cleared up a little, and she made a decision that was not considered stupid. She could not bear the reputation of being unfilial, so she took the initiative to bear the punishment for her mother. It was only 7 or 8 strokes. If she didn't do anything, the old woman might react and force her to bear the 23 strokes of the board. 7 or 8 or 23 strokes. Even a fool would know which to choose. The old woman reacted and pointed at the female soldier, asking her to bear the punishment. After all, she was her granddaughter. What was wrong with taking a few strokes for her grandmother? The guard smiled and said, "Granny, your granddaughter is very filial. She has already taken the initiative to bear 8 strokes for her mother. If she bears 23 strokes for you, she will lose her life here. You're a grandmother. You don't want to force your granddaughter to death, do you?" The old woman's face turned red, then green, and finally black. Her granddaughter took the initiative to bear the blame for her mother. She was a filial daughter, and as a grandmother, it would be unkind if she continued to push the blame. The guard added, "She is a girl after all. She is still young. If she is beaten too much, it will be bad if she can't have children in the future if she gets hurt. Granny has a few sons and sons-in-law. They are men, so it's not a big deal for them to take a few more strokes." The crowd jeered. Men were afraid of being spanked. The guard wanted to say something, but his companion winked at him, indicating that if the matter was dragged on for too long, the person in charge would be unhappy. Seeing this, the guard waved his hand and asked people to beat them one by one according to the rules. According to the rules, people who were punished in public had to take off their pants and be beaten on a high stool. The men were fine, but when it came to the daughters-in-law and daughters, they cried and screamed. The guard gloated, "You're all men. Why don't you take the punishment for your wife? We'll try to be gentle." The common people were convulsing with laughter and egging him on. "Yes, you're a man, but you let your wife take off her pants to be beaten? Try to be gentle, but it still hurts." The man who was beaten 8 times on the ground was furious, and he scolded his wife. "Stinky woman, you want to see me die so you can remarry, right? Can a few strokes kill me?" No matter how unwilling the old woman was, she was beaten 10 times in the end, and the remaining 13 strokes were shared among the younger generation. Originally, the younger generation was unwilling. Even the youngest son, whom the old woman doted on the most, couldn't help but hide far away when he heard this. In the end, They pushed each other and barely shared the 13 strokes. But the old woman still had to take 10. When it was the female soldier's turn, the guard said, "She came from the women's camp after all, and we've guarded the city together. You don't have to take off your pants." The female soldier's face was pale, and she murmured, "Thank you." There was a trick to beating someone. Where and how much strength was used, there was something fishy about it. The female soldier was beaten badly, but the guard showed mercy. She would recover in a few days. Chapter 551. Is the fight over? Jiang Pingji asked the guard who was kneeling below. Her eyes were indifferent. The guard said, "The execution has been completed." "Well, you may leave." Jiang Pingji sighed. She felt that she should strengthen the ideological education of the female soldiers. She originally wanted to influence them subtly, but now it seemed that it was not possible. She had to use a violent method. Let the female department of the government office write down the cause and effect of this matter, and post it on the city wall. Try to describe it from a fair point of view. Don't mix personal emotions and opinions. Since she wanted to punish the chicken to warn the monkey, she could not easily let go of this opportunity. She also needed to expand the scope of the news, and let all those who had such evil thoughts give up on these ideas as soon as possible. She did not want to receive similar news tomorrow or the day after. It was simply terrible. The army was the weapon of the country. Once they entered the army camp, they should focus on the overall situation and act according to the military law. However, the current situation of the society was that clan and blood ties were the most important. Even the country could be put aside. The audience in the streaming room felt that it was ridiculous for the people to drag their daughters back to get married. In fact, it was very normal. They regarded their children as private possessions. It was the parents' right to deal with them. Didn't they see that selling their children was the norm? Not to mention her society. Even in the society of the audience in the streaming room, was it not illegal for parents to sell their children? But in this society, all the behavior of parents towards their children was allowed and legal. It could not be considered a crime at all. It was not even wrong. "Huayu, help me write a notice," Jiang Pingji said. Feng Jin asked. "About the household registration of the female soldiers?" "Yes, it is indeed about this matter. I was muddle-headed before, and did not consider the overall situation. Compared to the promise I gave to the family of the female soldiers, they are naturally more willing to believe in their family. Otherwise, the female soldier just now would not have been so easily persuaded. It is still too early to get married, but the household registration can be put on the agenda. At least let them see my determination, lest they have worries and let their imagination run wild." She did not need to check to know that there must be a lot of messy voices in the female camp now, which would shake the stability of the army. It was actually a good thing that the family came to make trouble. It was ready-made material to punish the chicken to warn the monkeys. Jiang Pingji could use this excuse to beat down those who had disloyalty and appease the hearts of the people in the female camp. If the army's morale was lax, it would be difficult to lead the troops. Feng Jin was stunned for a moment, and then immediately nodded. "I will do it now," Jiang Pingji said. "Thank you." Based on Feng Jin's attitude in the past, it was obvious that he did not support the female battalions and women in politics. Otherwise, they would not have maintained a simple friendship in the beginning. If not for the earthquake in Dongqing, Feng Jin might not have been willing to help her sincerely. After all, she was a woman. Feng Jin suddenly smiled. "You're being too serious, my lord." The news of the female soldier sisters quickly spread. Many people who didn't have time to make a scene were frightened. If they were a step faster and wanted to sell their daughters in the women's camp, they would be the ones who would be beaten up. That was a total of 100 paddles. There were many people in the family, so they wouldn't be beaten to death. But for those with fewer people, wouldn't someone die? Some rejoiced, some mocked, and some gloated. What happened to the female soldier's sister was a wake-up call for everyone in the women's camp. It was also a wake-up call for their families. After entering the military camp, one could not get married or get pregnant before the age of 24. Violators would have to bear the punishment of 100 strokes and a fine of varying amounts. When Jiang Pingji clearly stated this rule, naturally, no one dared to make a fuss. She knew the principle of giving a carrot after a stick. In order to appease the people in the women's camp, she announced that she would start to deal with the matter of the independence of the female battalion's household registration. In this era, the military registration was a notch lower than that of a commoner. Daughters from good families were not willing to marry soldiers. However, the military registration that Jiang Pingji set up was different. The compensation and various arrangements for the orphans and family members after the war were very perfect. Soldiers of different ranks could receive different salaries. There was even a certain discount in the purchase of land and houses. If the officers and soldiers unfortunately died in the war, their family members and orphans could be properly arranged. If they were disabled due to the war, the government would arrange a job for them to make a living. If they were too seriously injured and could not do physical labor, the government would also allocate a certain amount of subsistence to ensure their livelihood. For such families, the family members could receive additional care, such as a certain discount for their children's schooling or a reduction in the tax on the land. Jiang Pingji listed out all the contents that she could think of. Then, she asked the people in the government office to modify and amend these regulations. Feng Jin looked at these and was stunned for a long time. When he returned home, Wei Jingxian carried Chongqing and fed her. Seeing her husband's face full of shame, she could not help but say a few words of concern. Feng Jin said, "I'm just ashamed. Lanting's boldness and ambition are indeed so shameful that I have no place to show my face." Post-war compensation. Throughout history, very few people mentioned it. Soldiers did not have anyone to rely on when they went to war. Otherwise, why would the people panic when conscription was mentioned and treat them like wolves and leopards? After all, there were only a few people who made contributions. Most people still died in the war in obscurity, or were left with lifelong disabilities, and no one to take care of them. Those with a bit of conscience would give some compensation, but they would always be exploited. In the end, they would only get a few copper coins. If there was no conscience, they would not give anything. The child that they had raised for more than 10 years would die in vain. That was why there was a saying that good men do not become soldiers and good women do not marry soldiers. Wei Jingxian listened to Feng Jin's narration. After a while she muttered, "This is a huge expense. Can Lanting support it?" Feng Jin shook his head. She said that we have to support it even if we have to live frugally. It's fine if the officers and soldiers bleed on the battlefield, but we can't let them cry after the war, right? Lanting's words were crude, but the truth was not. If it can be implemented, she can completely control the morale of the army and build an elite army that no one can defeat. Everyone knows the truth, but she is the only one who has the courage to do it. Jiang Pingji's territory was not big at the moment, but she had a private treasury. These benefits were nothing. However, when she started to conquer the world in the future, the number of people in her territory would increase day by day. The burden would be heavy. Post-war compensation was not something that could be solved in one go. 1 or 2 days were nothing. But how much of a burden would it be if it was a few years, a decade, or even decades? She had the courage to bring it up. Looking at the detailed regulations, it was obvious that it was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It should be the result of thinking for a long time. Wei Jingxian sighed and suddenly lowered her head to tease Chongqing, who was looking at them eagerly. She teased, Lanting, even though I know she is a woman, I still feel a little moved." Feng Jin's face darkened. Jealousy bubbled in his heart. "Madam." Chapter 552. "Sister, I'll have to trouble you to take care of me at home from now on." The female centurion helped her sister pack her luggage. The order to expel her from the military had already been issued, so her sister naturally had to pack her things and leave the women's battalion. "Rest well at home. Don't be afraid of spending money. My salary will be sent home in the future. You'll be in charge of it. If I let mother hold it, I'm sure she'll be cheated away by those black-hearted people." "Okay, I got it." From time to time, The older female soldier would raise her head to look at the younger sister, her eyes filled with regret. She didn't know what happened to her during that period of time. Her father and relatives bombarded her one after another, telling her that getting married was more reliable than being a soldier. If she got married, she could be the head of the family and become the wife of the head of the family. If she could get a boy, he might inherit the family business in the future, and there would be hope for the rest of her life. He gave her all kinds of examples, telling her that the Lord's promise was definitely a bluff. She was so muddle-headed that the scales in her heart were tilted towards her family. Now, she had been stripped of her military status. When she returned home, wouldn't she be tormented by her family? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but think of her younger sister. She was obedient and sensible, and much more reliable than her elder sister. In this era, if his 15-year-old sister hadn't entered the women's camp, she would probably have given birth to a baby and become a mother by now. I've seen through it. To put it bluntly, mother is also unclear. I gave her half a year's salary, hoping that she could rely on the money to be a little tougher at home, so that she wouldn't be bullied by grandma, bullied by auntie, and beaten by father. The more she spoke, the angrier she became. The younger female soldier could not help but grit her teeth. The barracks provided meals 3 times a day, and the food was very good. The rice and silver that were distributed every month had nowhere to use, so the sisters decided to secretly give them to their mother. It was just that they didn't expect this mother to trick them like this, attracting a group of blood-sucking leeches. Once those black-hearted relatives made a fuss, her sister would lose her military status, which was equivalent to losing a layer of protection. What would she do in the future? The marriage was ruined, the husband's family fled faster than a rabbit, and the family was beaten up because of this matter. They would definitely blame it on her sister. Thinking of this, the female soldier felt her head swell. Her younger sister continued, "Sis, don't be silly this time. If they make a scene at you, just hit them back. I'm still a centurion, who dares to hit my sister? It's the same for mother. You have to be more strong-willed, so that you and mother won't be bullied." Compared to the weak elder sister, the younger sister's personality was much tougher. Her younger sister nagged that the women's battalion only had 1 day off every month, and she could only go home once a month. The female soldier sister still did not say a word. She silently took the luggage that the girl handed over. Apart from a few sets of clothes and 2 sets of bedding, there was basically nothing else. When he exited the tent, he was surrounded by a dozen or so comrades whom he was on good terms with. Everyone was silent. The female soldier's lips quivered. "I'm leaving." Many of his comrades came to see him off, but there were also some female soldiers who were not familiar with him, who came to watch the fun. After all, she was the first person to be stripped of her military status and banished from the female battalion since its establishment. The female soldier's sister almost ran away in a panic. Even though no one said anything, she felt uncomfortable all over. It was as if there were countless pairs of half-smiling eyes looking at her, laughing at her for being weak and useless, laughing at her for abandoning a bright future, and willing to be tortured by her family. The female soldier's younger sister saw those amused gazes, and could not help but feel angry. She said shrewdly, "What are you looking at? If it wasn't for my sister, would your household register have been moved out so early?" A female soldier laughed and said, "Even if it wasn't for your sister, there might be someone else's sister. Everyone knows what happened in the women's battalion recently. However, your parents couldn't help it, and your sister's brain is also empty. In my opinion, it's good that your sister left the women's battalion early. She doesn't care, and there are plenty of people who want to get in. If it wasn't for her suspecting the Lord, would this have happened? She didn't care, but there were plenty of people who did. If this matter was investigated carefully, it was clearly the female soldier's sister, who was disloyal and distrustful of the Lord. What was the use of such a person in the women's battalion?" The female soldier's younger sister was speechless. "Forget it. Didn't Commandant Jiang always say that people who want to save themselves can be saved, but those who resign themselves to adversity are definitely hopeless?" Your sister's skills are considered one of the best among the female soldiers. If your family members hit her, do you think she will fight back? You should be more careful. If you have time to bicker here, why don't you go and beat up your parents? Lest your sister's corpse turns cold the next time you go back on your break. No matter how good her skills were, she would still be beaten to death if she didn't resist. These words were somewhat vicious, but they were not without reason. The female soldier's face turned green and then red. This matter was only lively for 2 days, and the female soldier's attention was attracted by another major event. The female soldiers who had performed meritorious deeds in the previous few battles were the first to receive their own independent household register, and they were the owners of the household. Although all the female soldiers could receive their own independent household register, there were differences in the timing. The first batch of female soldiers had performed meritorious deeds. Imperceptibly, this increased the desire of the female soldiers to achieve meritorious deeds. This policy also dissatisfied many of the female soldiers' families, and they opposed it. The owners of the household were the people who were in charge of the household. If these losers ran away one by one, how could they control them in the future? However, under Jiang Pingji's strong suppression, the voices of resistance quickly disappeared without a trace. Fengyi County was a rare refuge. If the district magistrate hated them, and they were chased out, how could the family survive? Even though they were unwilling, this policy was still implemented smoothly. It was just that the household register management department was pitiful. There weren't many female soldiers, but they weren't few either. Thousands of people had been separated from their original household registration. It wasn't as simple as just moving their household registration. There were also issues of property and inheritance involved. Everyone was busy from day to night. It was still summer, but they were already half dead. While Jiang Pingji took care of the female battalion, she did not forget about the male battalion. Welfare policies were promulgated one after another, which greatly reduced their worries during the war. As a result, the male soldiers did not care about envying the female battalion. Each of them was grinning from ear to ear. Even though they were training under the hot summer sun, they were still full of energy. They could hear the roaring slogans in the military camp from afar. After the incident with the female battalion, Jiang Pingji realized that most of the soldiers' thoughts had been fixed. The efficiency of subtle influence was too slow, and it was difficult to have an effect in a short period of time. Since that was the case, it was better to choose simple and violent brainwashing methods. Whether it was morning training or evening training, everyone had to shout the rules of the military camp and use them as slogans during training. It was the same for both the male and female battalions. 1 or 2 days was nothing. She did not believe that these people would not be affected day after day. Jintian Khan. Streamer, you are getting closer to our party. You have a bright future. I have high hopes for you. Hey Apinga. Streamer, do you want to consider setting up a political commissar in the military camp? Given that the ancient and modern military systems are different, the political commissar you set up doesn't have to manage too much. Usually, he will tell the soldiers simple war stories and instill ideas that you think are useful. Occasionally, he will manage internal affairs. He will be like a good wife who is a housekeeper. He will teach illiterate soldiers how to read and eliminate illiteracy. Chapter 553. Using the words of the audience in the streaming room to mock themselves, they were just a group of salted fish whose main job was to shout 666. Their secondary job was to watch the drama unfold. However, watching the drama unfold was one thing. Salted fish also had brains. Their suggestions would also inspire Jiang Pingji. For example, she had considered the position of political commissar carefully. She was quite tempted, but when combined with reality, she wilted and could not carry it out. Shenghajia Tianyuan potato chips. Why? Isn't this a good suggestion? I think it's very feasible. Salami Jishui. Don't be anxious. The streamer only said it's not feasible now. She didn't say it's not feasible in the future. It's probably because the conditions are not ripe yet. Do you think a housekeeper can be a political commissar? The most basic requirement is that a political commissar is not illiterate. After the bullet screen was posted, many of the anxious salted fishes calmed down. Yes, they forgot that 99 out of 100 people in the streamer's world were illiterate. The position of political commissar was not to be knowledgeable, but he must not be illiterate. Otherwise, how could he brainwash people? How could he eliminate illiteracy? To put it bluntly, Jiang Pingji was still short of manpower. How could she not be short of manpower? First, recruit talents and use various benefits to attract refugees to settle down. Recruit soldiers, and buy horses to strengthen their strength. Jiang Pingji was already working hard on this point. Wei Xiai had also sent more than 10 letters to students he was close to, but he had not received any replies yet. Second, nurture talents herself. Speaking of nurturing talents, one had to mention the academy. The academy was the cradle of talents. Jiang Pingji previously tricked Sheng Guanwan to be her teacher. She ordered people to build a small academy in Xiangyang district, where the military was the strongest. She planned to recruit 100 clever students. At present, the construction of the academy had reached its end. The enrollment plan could also be put on the agenda. As long as she trained them for a year or two, she could quickly recruit a batch of low-level talents. Not to mention anything else, at least they could be a political commissar and brainwash the soldiers by telling them stories. Third, birth. Encourage women of suitable age to have children. After all, new lives were the future. Too many people died in war, which would cause a sharp decline in the population. If there was not an appropriate number of newborns, the population would show a negative growth, which would be detrimental to long-term development. Speaking of the third point, Jiang Pingji could not help but scratch the wall. Why was the fertility conditions here so backward? I really don't want to issue this law. I feel like it goes against my own principles, but I have no choice but to do it. Sigh. Jiang Pingji finished scratching the wall and complained to the audience with a serious face. The audience in the streaming room had been with her for a few years. Through the bits and pieces of information she occasionally revealed, they knew why Jiang Pingji said that. In the host's world, the birth of new life depended on the hard work of scientists. Men and women donated their sperm and eggs, and went home to wait to hold their children. Even so, men and women still found it troublesome to have children, and the population grew at a negative rate. It was only thanks to the clever government that they started the population breeding program that they managed to stabilize the human population, which had been declining for a while. You said that the womb nurtures and naturally reproduces new life? Dear, a few years in prison is waiting for you, starting from 10 years, up to a lifetime. Now for a big shot of the Federation to issue a law to encourage women of suitable age to have children. In her opinion, this crime was enough to warrant a death sentence. Complaining was one thing, but it still had to be done. There was a great drought in the north that year, and the crops in the fields had almost withered. The Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group, who were fighting so hard that they could barely hold on. Now that they could no longer resist, the situation in the north had stabilized a little, at least before the spring plowing next year. There would be no large-scale conflicts in the north. This was a good opportunity to cultivate and recuperate. Jiang Pingji intended to seize this opportunity to let the people under her rule cultivate and recuperate, such as giving birth to a baby. However, even though it was a policy to encourage the population, Jiang Pingji also added some personal items. The best age for women to give birth was between 25 and 30 years old. The body was basically mature, the bones were completely calcified, and the pelvis was further widened. This was the most suitable state for giving birth. This was also one of the reasons why Jiang Pingji set the retirement age for female soldiers at 24 years old. If the population was to be encouraged, she decided to give appropriate encouragement and benefits to pregnant women at this age. Of course, in view of the high probability of abandoning baby girls in this era, if birth was encouraged, it was unknown how many baby girls would be abandoned or murdered as soon as they were born. For this reason, she also added another rule. If the families did not want to raise the baby girls that were born, they could send the baby girls to the nursery. They could not abandon or deliberately murder them. Families who were willing to raise the baby girls would be given some convenience. However, although she had a good idea, many people, including the strategists under her, were a little puzzled. Most of the people got married between 13 and 18 years old. It would be a big problem if they got married later. Therefore, their childbirth was also concentrated at this age. Why did the Lord reward pregnant women between 25 and 30 years old? According to the current trend, pregnant women in their 30s could basically have children with their daughters-in-law. Faced with this doubt, Jiang Pingji blinked and said, "You're uncultured. Read more." Feng Jin, who was reprimanded as uncultured, readily asked, "Which book should I read?" "Medical books, of course." Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "I read a variety of books. I've read all kinds of medical books. Medical books also say that it's not good for a woman's health if she gives birth too early. Haven't you noticed that for those young couples who have 7 or 8 children, basically only the children born later can survive? The children born earlier are either weak and sickly, or died early due to other reasons." Feng Jin was slightly surprised. Was there really such a thing? Of course there was. Many doctors were also aware of it, but they could not say it. Whoever said it would be scolded. Which family did not hope for their wife to quickly bear children for the family? The Feng family had strict upbringing. Whether it was a man or a woman marrying a wife, the age of marriage was 17 or 18 years old. Some were even 2 years later. The situation was much better than those who got married and had children at the age of 13 or 14. Therefore, Feng Jin really did not have many feelings about this. However, if he carefully understood the people at the bottom of the social ladder, he would know the truth of Jiang Pingji's words. Jiang Pingji said again, "I'm not saying that children in their teens are not allowed to have children. I'm just more encouraging older people to have more children. Instead of giving birth at the age of 13 or 14, and having 7 or 8 children in their 20s, only 2 or 3 children survived in the end. It was better to wait a little longer. When the body was slightly developed, the survival rate of the children would be higher." Medical technology in this era was very backward. It was very risky for women to give birth at an inappropriate age. The risk was even greater. Jiang Pingji's current strength was still too weak. She would not go against the trend of the entire society, but she could adapt to the situation. Not only could she achieve her goal, but it was also in line with the current trend. She worked hard to find a balance between the two and slowly changed the world. Feng Jin's mind was a little messy. After a while, he said helplessly, "If that's the case, it's best for my lord to collude with a few doctors and tell them the reason. Otherwise, if this law of yours is passed down, I don't know how many people will scold you." Why did he scold Jiang Pingji secretly? Chapter 554. Doctor, will my daughter-in-law's child be alright? Ever since Jiang Pingji issued the new laws, the people were puzzled and overjoyed at the same time. They were puzzled. They could not understand why their lord wanted an old woman, between 25 and 30 years old, to give birth to a child. The child would be the same age as her grandchildren. Wouldn't she feel ashamed? However, the doctor in charge had said that the Lord's words were not wrong. The people followed blindly and were more easily influenced by public opinion. In terms of fertility treatment, who had more power than the doctor? The doctor said that pregnant women who gave birth to children at a young age would have a weak body, and the pregnant woman would not be in good health. The people began to recall. They all married and had children very early. Which family's daughter-in-law did not get pregnant several times and give birth to 7 or 8 children? What was the result? How many children were raised? Putting aside human factors and starvation, if one were to consider the possibility of dying prematurely due to a weak body, it would be extremely terrifying. There were no effective contraceptives in this era. Once you were pregnant, you had to give birth, no matter how long it was between the 2 births. Thinking in this direction, the people shuddered. Which family's daughter-in-law did not give birth when they were in their teens? If they did not die from dystocia, the children would jump out one after another. 7 or 8 children would be born, and in the end, only 2 or 3 would survive. If they encountered other disasters, it was estimated that only 1 child would be left. Some would not even have a child. They found that the children born later in life were indeed stronger. At that time, they thought that it was because their lives were better. Those whose daughter-in-law was pregnant could not sit still. Pregnant women lined up in front of the clinic. The doctor could meet hundreds of mothers-in-law like the one in front of him, who was worried about their unborn grandchildren. He secretly sighed in his heart. The doctor felt that he was unlucky today. Why was it his turn to be on duty? Your daughter-in-law is strong. If she takes good care of her pregnancy and relaxes her mind, she will definitely give birth to a healthy child. The woman said, but my daughter-in-law is only 16 years old this year. The doctor curled his lips in his heart. Even if she was only 13 years old, could she abort the child, not to mention 16 years old? Which medical student did not know that giving birth too early was easy for the child to be born with congenital deficiencies? However, he could not say this. Marrying a wife was to carry on the family line. Why would these mothers-in-law, who only had grandchildren in their eyes, care about this? Anyway, she was someone else's daughter. It was wrong that she couldn't give birth to a son, and it was also wrong that she couldn't raise a son. Everyone was in the wrong, except for being a mother-in-law. The doctor was frustrated, but he replied gently, childbirth is also divided into innate and acquired. Even if there were some innate deficiencies, with proper care, it could be made up for. But it would take more effort. Looking at your daughter-in-law's complexion, I saw that she seemed to be in a difficult position. Looking at her pulse, it was obscure and heavy. This was a knot in her heart. Old madam, don't worry too much. Don't give her too much pressure. Pregnant women need to feel good physically and mentally, be healthy, and be in a good mood. This way they can give birth to better children. Don't you think so? The doctor in charge had been instructed that they had to insist on giving birth early. Although it was easy for a child to die young, they could not say that it was too late. Although the child born early was congenitally deficient, it could still be healthy and lively after careful care. It was just that the adult had to take good care of the child, and could not be careless. Jiangpingji's medical center was an institution that attracted a lot of fans. The medical herbs and the doctor's salary were specially subsidized by the government office. In this way, the people's expenditure for medical treatment was less. The doctor could focus more on treating the patients and did not need to consider other chores. Anyone who had a headache or fever could come to see a doctor. It did not cost much, and the medicine was not expensive. In order to take care of the female patients, there were also female medical soldiers who took turns to learn medicine in the medical center. For almost a year, the medical center in Xiangyang district had a good impression of the people. Since the doctor in charge said so, the people thought for a while in a daze. They could accept the laws that Jiangpingji had issued. Pregnant women in their 20s were a little old, but it was easy for them to give birth, and the children they gave birth to were healthy. This was an advantage. Fengyi County ushered in a small baby boom. It diluted the gloomy atmosphere to some extent, and brought some joy. This year, there was a great drought in the north. Not to mention that there was no harvest in the fields. The scorching sun hung high in the sky, and there was a lack of water everywhere. Without food, the most they could do was starve. When they were extremely hungry, they could eat mud, bark, tree roots, and grass. However, without water, they could not survive for 3 to 4 days. The Tsingyi army was the first to be defeated because they only knew how to destroy and not produce and manage. In order to survive, there were more and more deserters. The increasing number of deserters meant that there were more and more mobs and refugees. In comparison, the situation of the Red Lotus group was still considered good. They fought with their faith and governed the people with their faith. There was a drought in the entire northern territory. They even led the people to pray to the gods. Although it was useless, it eased the panic of the people to a certain extent. Under such circumstances, the construction of Fengyi County was already on the right track. The originally dilapidated Maolin district, Chenggan district, and Jiaoping district all showed signs of vitality. Some refugees who escaped back thought that they had come to the wrong place. Was this still their old hometown? Every day, refugees fled into Fengyi County. Outside the city, People could be seen waiting for inspection and resettlement. Although they were still very poor, as long as there were enough people, there was no need to fear that they could not develop. The weather is hot now. The water level of the wells has been dropping. There are also traces of the mountain streams drying up. Yang Xi's face, which could be compared to the full moon, had become so thin that a sharp chin could be seen. His black stubble had not been trimmed in time. He looked very pathetic. The canals are covered with green bricks, but the water has been decreasing. I think the other 3 districts are in the same situation. What should we do? The boy servant no longer learned cooking from the chef. He was pulled over by his master to tidy up documents, and was ordered around as half a labor force. He said, "Why don't we restrict the people's daily water use?" Wei Xi shook his head. "No. If we do this, it will easily cause panic among the people. Every household will rush to store water. That will be bad. New refugees gathered every day. If the news of water shortage in the city was spread at this time, who knew how chaotic it would be?" The boy's servant had a bitter expression. "What should we do?" Wei Xi thought about it. "Why don't we change the method?" It was the same as controlling the use of water, but the method of publicity was different. The effect caused was also very different. Yang Xi said in surprise, "Change the method?" Wei Xi said, "Now there are so many refugees outside the city. There is a large area of drought in the north. Many people don't have access to water. In serious cases, they will die of thirst. In that case, we will inform the people inside and outside the city about the serious situation in the north. Tell them that although there is no shortage of water in the county, every household should cherish the current situation, save water, and reduce unnecessary waste of water." Thinking about how other people did not have access to water, if the people of each household wasted water, wouldn't their conscience hurt? The boy servant and Wei Xi had the same purpose. It was obvious that the former would cause panic and chaos, while the latter could make the people feel guilty and save water spontaneously. It could even increase the people's gratitude toward Jiang Pingji. Without her, would everything happen today? Chapter 555. Facts proved that Wei Xi's method was indeed effective. Not only did it not cause panic among the people, but it even made them more united. However, this method ultimately treated the symptoms, but not the root cause. Every day that God did not give them face and rain, the drought would become more serious. Compared to the scene of thousands of miles of dry fields outside, the situation in Fengyi County was much better. Jiang Pingji's brain and spirit had returned to their peak state. It was not difficult for her to explore the underground water flow. Even without this, based on her previous experience, she could easily find a place to dig a well. With such a strong backer, the water shortage was not serious. Jiang Pingji held a honey popsicle in her mouth and said vaguely, "It's so hot." The boiled water was mixed with a thick layer of honey. After stirring, it was placed into a special groove mold. Finally, it was placed into the fridge and made into an edible popsicle. The pure natural honey tasted quite sweet, and it made one's entire body feel comfortable, dispelling the heat in one's body. As for the fridge, of course, it was not the fridge that the audience in the streaming room was familiar with. It was also not the one that Jiang Pingji bought from the mall. That shabby and rubbish mall did not even sell a bathtub, let alone high-end furniture like a fridge. Even if there was, where could they find a generator? The fridge that Jiang Pingji mentioned was actually the ice-making box that she and Jiang Ping had created. It was called fridge for short. In ancient times, ice was mostly made from snow and ice in winter. Then it was stored in an ice cellar and enjoyed in the next summer. Jiang Pingji knew how to make ice, but she did not know the name of the ice-making material in this era. After pondering with Jiang Ping and Jiang Ping for a long time, she finally found a material that could be used to make ice. The audience in the streaming room said that it was called saltpeter, a good material for making ice in ancient times. Adhering to the principle that good things should be enjoyed by her subordinates, Jiang Pingji had enough honey popsicles. She asked someone to send the fridge that she made to the other 3 counties to reward her subordinates who had worked hard. They worked overtime in the summer, and ate some popsicles to cool down. My lord, water came out from 3 wells yesterday. As long as we get through this month, the weather should gradually turn cold. Zhang Ping was a technical geek. The person he admired the most in his life was his lord. Her ability to find wells was better than any experienced farmer. Wherever she said a well would produce water, there would definitely be water. If it wasn't so, how could the people live so comfortably? More or less. I hope the heavens will give me some face and rain more before the autumn harvest. That way, I won't be considered to have no harvest this year. Last year, Xiangyang district reclaimed a lot of wastelands. The wastelands were rented to the people in the county town for farming. Even though there was a shortage of water this summer, the people saved water to take care of the fields. For the past few months, it was unknown how much effort they had put in to take care of the crops in the fields. If something went wrong during this period, causing a year's worth of hard work to go down the drain, it was unknown how much the farmers would cry. The two of them sat under the porch and leisurely nibbled on popsicles. There were 2 halves of watermelon beside them. After nibbling on the popsicles, they used a spoon to dig into the watermelon. When Feng Jin rushed over, drenched in sweat, this was the scene he saw. His lord was dressed in gray and brown. Her legs were crossed inelegantly. Her trousers were rolled up to her thighs, and her sleeves were rolled up to her shoulders. Her long, jet green hair was combed into a ponytail. 2 strands of bangs hung on both sides of her cheeks. She held half a large watermelon in her arms, and held a spoon in her right hand as she ate and drank. Zhang Ping's image was not much better. Feng Jin's face instantly darkened. Seeing his expression, the live stream room took the initiative to add psychological words. F***ck. These 2 beasts. Jiang Pingji found it funny. Feng Jin was born in an aristocratic family. His upbringing was very good. He would not curse at the slightest provocation. Feng Jin stepped forward and carefully avoided the watermelon skin that was scattered all over the ground. My lord. What's the matter, Huayu? Jiang Pingji raised her head. There was still a piece of watermelon seed at the corner of her mouth. She looked very innocent. Zhang Ping, on the other hand, knew how to maintain his image. He covered his mouth with his big sleeves and quietly wiped his mouth. He sat upright, but his stomach was a little full. He felt a little bloated when he stood up. Feng Jin took a deep breath and told himself to be patient. He did not want to lose his temper with such an unreliable lord. He said, I just received news that something big happened in the south. The second prince's wife, Anyina, died suddenly. The cause of death is unknown. Jiang Pingji's brain worked for a moment. She remembered who Anyina was. She shuddered and asked with a serious expression, Anyina is dead? Who was Anyina? Some of the viewers who were following the updates intermittently did not know, but the veteran viewers who had a stronger sense of crisis remembered. Waitule Jinyu. Anyina? Isn't she the princess of the royal family of the northern borderline, who later married the second prince of Dongqing? Fangding Ziyu. She's dead. Why is Feng Jin so nervous? If she's dead, then so be it. Shenjia. Please, can you have some political awareness? Chapter 556. The people did not know about Anyina's death. Even if they knew, it was just the death of a member of the royal family. However, the news was enough to stir up the situation in the north, if it fell into the ears of sensitive people. Jiang Pingji's face darkened. She inquired about the recruitment of soldiers and the training of the new recruits. Due to the drought in the north, many members of the Tsingyi army, or the Red Lotus group, felt that they could not live on. They left the organization and became refugees. Fengyi County was an oasis in the desert for these refugees. They tried their best to get close to it. Jiang Pingji asked people to screen them carefully and select those with better qualities to enter the new recruit camp. Thanks to the household registration policy of the female camp, the recruitment was quite smooth. Many women who were forced by life also wanted to enter. However, Jiang Pingji raised the threshold of the female camp. She only selected women who were physically strong, agile, and determined to ensure the combat power of the female camp. In this era, the population could only be multiplied by women giving birth. However, the female camp stipulated that women could only get married and give birth after retiring from the army at the age of 24. If too many women entered the female camp, the population of the territory under her rule would inevitably be affected. This was what Jiang Pingji did not want to see. Apart from that, winning a war did not depend on who had more people. The overall quality was also very important. She would rather the number of people in the female camp be half that of the male camp. But the combat level must not decline. Quality was more important than quantity. Jiang Pingji asked with a serious expression. How's the mining of the iron ore? Feng Jin said. The Tsingy army soldiers who were captured have been sent to mine. The iron ore vein is considered rich, but in terms of smelting, it's beyond our capabilities. I'm afraid we have to carefully look for skilled craftsmen. This is not difficult. I can think of a way to solve it. The territory had iron ore, which meant that they did not need to buy it outside at a high price. They could save a lot of money. Last year, they bought thousands of sets of simple infantry equipment. It made Jiang Pingji's heart ache. They spent money like water, even if the money was contributed by the prodigal women of the north borderline. It was her money once it entered her warehouse. Feng Jin said again, but I'm afraid it's difficult to deal with the cavalry of the north borderline. To deal with the north borderline, they had to face their cavalry. According to previous understanding, the army of the 3 tribes of the north borderline was generally composed of infantry and cavalry. The ratio of the two was about 1:2. More than 10 years ago, the 3 tribes of the north borderline sent troops to attack Chongzhou Shangyu County. They used 100,000 troops, including 60,000 to 70,000 cavalry. After the battle, the enemy was unstoppable, taking down 6 cities in a row. If not for the quick response of the residents of Jinbei Marquis, the entire Chongzhou would have been conquered by them if they had been delayed for more than 10 days. The 3 tribes of the north borderline were nomadic people. They dealt with horses all year round. To put it bluntly, children of 7 or 8 years old could ride a horse and gallop on the plains of the north borderline. If the nobles of Dongqing did not have the help of stirrups, they could not even climb up the back of a horse. Stirrups had just appeared in this era, but they were not widely used. Only a few aristocrats would equip their horses with simple stirrups. It was not easy to ride a horse these days, but many people who were skilled in horsemanship did not like to use stirrups. Take Li Yun for example. He often rode a horse without stirrups. That was why he was teased by the audience in the live streaming room, praising his unparalleled waist strength, and saying dirty things like how his wife would be blessed in the future. The stirrups could be further improved to assist the cavalry in fighting on horseback. Even those who were not good at riding could quickly learn how to ride. However, in terms of cavalry, even if Jiang Pingji started preparing now, it would be difficult to beat the north borderline in terms of quality, let alone quantity. Unless, while she trained the cavalry, she also trained a special unit that could restrain cavalry. Jiang Pingji's eyes darkened, and her brain began to work. Feng Jin saw that she was in a state of deep thought, and could not help but interlock her fingers. He knew that his lord was thinking of a solution, so he did not disturb her. He just waited for her to finish thinking. It's not impossible to deal with cavalry. For Jiang Pingji, there was no unit that was invincible. Even if it was the special genetic warfare force formed by the Human Alliance, they were not invincible. They could still encounter natural enemies. Similarly, it was even more impossible for the simple and crude light cavalry, like the 3 tribes of the north borderline, to be invincible. Feng Jin asked, "What do you have in mind, my lord?" Jiang Pingji said, "I want to train an army that specializes in killing horses. The horse farms of Dongqing are in Sangzhou, and Sangzhou is the territory of the Mengs. They are not on the same side as us. If we want to buy enough war horses through this channel, I'm afraid we will have to go bankrupt. If war breaks out in the north borderline, they will also keep an eye on the whereabouts of the horses. It is not realistic for us to make a last-minute effort to expand the cavalry." Zhang Ping, who was at the side, said, "My lord, do you want to play to your strengths and avoid fighting with the cavalry? and instead develop a way to restrain them. When it came to horse warfare, even Zhongzhou, which had the strongest national power, did not dare to say that it could defeat the north borderline. Instead of competing with the cavalry, it was better to find another way and develop a special unit that specialized in restraining the cavalry. This was indeed an idea. Jiang Pingji nodded and said, "Warhorses are the other life of the cavalry. Once they lose their warhorses, the cavalry is as fragile as a snail with its shell removed. We can now produce our own iron. We can make long swords and heavy shields. If we let different units work together, for example, there are soldiers who specialize in holding heavy shields to resist the cavalry's first charge, and there are other soldiers who use long swords or long spears to stab and kill the warhorses." This was just an idea, and the actual implementation still needed to be tested. For example, how strong the cavalry's charge was, what kind of heavy shields and strength could block the enemy, and how to protect the rear formation from chaos. Jiang Pingji said again, "Huayu, you have seen the penetrating power of the bed crossbow before, right?" "Bed crossbow? Using the bed crossbow to deal with the cavalry?" Feng Jin nodded and said doubtfully, "But the bed crossbow is heavy and not easy to move. If it's used against the cavalry, I'm afraid it's beyond our power." Zhang Ping shook his head and said to Feng Jin, "Huayu, you are wrong. What my lord means is that if the bed crossbow can be moved like the cavalry, how much damage can it cause to the cavalry? The bed crossbow can be placed on the chariot, so it's naturally more convenient to move. Of course, we can also install wheels on the bed crossbow, but the tension of the bed crossbow is too great. Once the arrow is fired, it will move the entire chariot." The thinking of a technical geek was more agile than that of a normal person. Zhang Ping's direction of thinking was naturally different from Feng Jin's. "We can give it a try." Feng Jin recalled the penetrating power and shooting range of the bed crossbow, and he felt a little more confident. Jiang Pingji poured a bucket of cold water on him. She said, "Adding wheels to the bed crossbow or installing it on the chariot can indeed make the bed crossbow more flexible. But compared to the cavalry, it's still too slow. It's a fantasy to rely on this to deal with the cavalry. At most, it can catch them off guard and pose a threat to the first charge. When the enemy realizes it, this move won't work." Jiang Pingji added, "Although the lethality of the improved crossbow is not as good as the bed crossbow, its mobility and flexibility are far better than the latter. If we build a unit that specializes in restraining the cavalry, we can let the soldiers use the improved crossbow. Such soldiers can be called archer infantry." Feng Jin could understand. It was equivalent to the previous troops, but the number of people was increased by more than 10 times. Chapter 557. There were many types of cavalry, but there was no detailed division of troops in this era. The types of troops were very simple. For example, most of the cavalry in the north borderline were light cavalry. They lacked mineral veins, so the armor of the soldiers was naturally not made of copper and iron. It was all woven with special rattan. This was similar to their ancestors, the Qiangwu tribe. The rattan armor of the Qiangwu tribe was repeatedly soaked in oil and supplemented with special craftsmanship. It was very tough and had a good defense. The key was that it was light. However, looking at the outcome of the Qiangwu tribe, hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen were burned to death by Prime Minister Huangfu. The three tribes of the north borderline learned a lesson from their ancestors and changed the craftsmanship of rattan armor. It seemed that they were not afraid of fire anymore. The situation of the infantry of the north borderline was similar to that of the cavalry. They wore rattan armor and held broadswords or spears. As for the division of troops and cooperation in battle, was there such a thing? Jiang Pingji had fought with the Tsingyi army so far. The opponents were all unarmored soldiers. Their combat power was less than 5%. The elite troops and infantry of the north borderline were not comparable to the third-rate troops like the Tsingyi army. Their numbers alone were enough to scare people. To deal with such an enemy, she naturally had to show a serious attitude and let them see the art of war. Therefore, it was very important to classify the troops. It would be a nightmare for a single troop type to encounter a troop type that could restrain it. Jiang Pingji explained her idea. She was prepared to divide the troops under her into different troops and carry out targeted training. Feng Jin said, "Time is too tight. We don't have enough manpower. I'm afraid it will be difficult. No matter how difficult it is, we have to give it a try. Otherwise, we can only sit and wait for death." If the North Borderline sent out troops, they would definitely need time to prepare. Jiang Pingji could seize the time to train the new troops. In ancient times, many men were recruited into the military camp. After a few days of training, they could be pulled to the battlefield. However, the combat power and quality of those soldiers were not good. The training period for the new troops recruited by Jiang Pingji was at least half a year. The training time was concentrated in winter and summer. The harsh weather could better temper one's will and body. As for spring and autumn, they helped with the spring plowing in spring, helped with the autumn harvest in autumn, and continued training in their free time. Anyway, they could not stop. When he entered Jiang Pingji's military camp, he was given training periods throughout the year. He was only allowed 1 day off every month. With this kind of training, the soldiers could definitely be considered as elite soldiers. Not to mention that most of them had participated in more than one battle. Their combat experience and quality were far stronger than those fresh recruits. They were not people who could be compared to the miscellaneous soldiers who were here to make up the numbers. They could easily take on 5 of them at once. Almost the next day, the news of Anyina's sudden death spread to the other 3 districts of Fengyi County. When Qiguan Reng received the news, the sky was dark. He was working on documents with an oil lamp. He was so sleepy that his eyelids were drooping. When he heard the news, it was as if a bolt of lightning had struck him from head to toe. He was so shocked that he immediately woke up. Su Ke's reaction was almost the same. He dropped the work at hand, wrote a letter, and sent it to Xiangyang district overnight. The only ones who were calm and composed were Wei Ci and Yang Si of Chang'an district. To be precise, there was only Wei Ci. Yang Si asked, "Why aren't you anxious? The North Borderline has the ambition of wolves. When they send their troops this time, their military strength will definitely not be weak. How can the military strength of Chongzhou withstand their iron hooves? Once the borders are invaded, I'm afraid Dongqing will follow the same path as Nansheng. I'm afraid your lord's head will be in danger." Yang Si did not care who would be the emperor of Dongqing, but it definitely could not be the foreign tribes of the North Borderline. Wei Ci was not anxious. Instead, he laughed. Don't worry. The North Borderline probably won't be able to attack this time. They still have a head full of lawsuits." Yang Si was surprised and hurriedly asked him, "You're such a torturous fox. If you have something to say, just say it. Aren't you afraid of being beaten up? Tell me in detail. Why can't the North Borderline attack this time? They've been coveting Dongqing for a long time. Now that the war in the north is endless, and the war in the south is incessant, this is the best time for the North Borderline to send their troops south. Could it be that the 3 tribes of the North Borderline are in internal strife?" Wei Ci shook his head. The current king of the North Borderline is extremely dignified. He's in his prime, and has strong methods of ruling. He's already unified the forces of the North Borderline since he became the king. Before he's in his twilight years or dies, the internal affairs of the North Borderline won't be chaotic. Yang Si did not understand. If there was no internal strife in the North Borderline, why couldn't they attack the south? Wei Ci said, "Buddha says it can't be said." Yang Si said angrily, "Nonsense. You're just asking for a beating." He had made a bad friend by mistake. Wei Ci had already sent a letter to Xiangyang district regarding this issue. Others did not understand, but he believed that Jiang Pingji would definitely believe his words. Qiguan Reng, Su Ke, and Wei Ci's letters arrived almost one after another. The 3 messengers rushed over on horseback overnight. Jiang Pingji tore open the seal and took out the neatly folded letter inside. She first read Qiguan Reng's letter, which arrived first, then Su Ke's and finally Wei Ci's. Unlike the previous 2 who asked about countermeasures, Wei Ci's letter contained only a few words. It was these few words that made Jiang Pingji's brows relax. Her eyes were filled with joy. At the beginning of the 11th month of the 20th year of Tianwu, there was a horse plague in the north borderline. The war horses contracted the disease and died suddenly. She read the letter, took a flint and burned it to ashes. If that's the case, it looks like I'll have to ask Uncle Gu to fish for the last sum of money in the north borderline. Fish harder. Her eyes seemed to sparkle. She spread out a piece of paper, ground it, picked up a brush, and wrote a letter. Guards, call the chief supervisor of the brick kiln here. I have something important to discuss with him. Among the armies of the 3 tribes in the north borderline, the ratio of infantry to cavalry had reached a ratio of 1:2. If a large number of war horses contracted the disease and died, it was tantamount to cutting off their right-hand men. They would not be able to recover their peak combat power in the next few years, let alone go south. This bought a lot of time for Jiang Pingji to grow. Previously, she felt that there was not enough time, but now she was slightly relieved. However, she did not completely believe the contents of the letter. It was not because she suspected Wei Ci, but because of the butterfly effect. Who knew if the horse plague in the north borderline would occur regularly? Perhaps it was swallowed by the butterfly's wings, or perhaps time had moved backward. Before it was completely confirmed, Jiang Pingji would not let down her guard. She still had to make preparations. However, regardless of whether the north borderline had the ability to send troops south, the business there would not last long. Jiang Pingji planned to fish for the last sum of money and swindle millions of strings of coins. The supervisor of the brick kiln rushed over overnight. Jiang Pingji ordered him to open the brick kiln again and fire a large batch of exquisite glassware. Previously, when she swindled the north borderline, the amount of glassware fired was limited, and it was sold slowly, creating an illusion that glass was very valuable. Almost every noble in the north borderline had a glass tea set as a fashion. Those noble ladies in the north borderline liked to collect glass jewelry. Wearing a set of glass would make them look good, and make them the focus of banquets. More noble ladies could not buy it even if they had the money. Now that Dongqing and the north borderline were about to go to war, Jiang Pingji planned to make a fortune before the relationship broke down. Chapter 558. In order to protect the secret of the glass to the greatest extent, the vicinity of the brick kiln was heavily guarded. Everyone who worked in the kiln was strictly monitored. Jiang Pingji also had a detailed grasp of their family members and the recent flow of money. Of course, as compensation, all the craftsmen who worked in the kiln could get a generous monthly salary. The old and young in the family could also get easier jobs. Children of the right age had the priority to enter the college to receive education. Under multiple measures, the secret of the glass was well protected. Every firing was extremely confidential. The fired glass had to be registered, and the defective products had to be strictly destroyed. In order to whet the appetite of the noble ladies of the northern borderline, the quantity of the previous firing was relatively small. There were no more than 100 sets scattered. Now, in order to cheat the northern borderline of the last sum of money, Jiang Pingji ordered people to fire in large quantities. They worked day and night. The craftsman of the brick kiln was sweating profusely at the desperate effort. He was afraid that he would receive the wrong order while he was still asleep. By the time Gu Xian arrived with the caravan, Jiang Pingji had already fired thousands of sets of glassware. Many of them were exquisite glass jewelry. Even though Gu Xian knew that these things were not worth much, when they were placed together, his heart could not take it. Gu Xian hurriedly asked, "Young master, what are you doing?" Glass did not cost much, but it could be sold at a sky-high price. It should be sold slowly, and strive to maximize the profit. Once this thing became widespread, it would not be worth much. Jiang Pingji said to Gu Xian, "Uncle Gu, don't worry. Have you heard about the sudden death of the princess of the northern borderline, Anyina? Now that the royal family of Dongqing has occupied Qinzhou, Prince Changshu has led the troops to besiege them. The two are in a stalemate. Now that the princess of the northern borderline has died, I'm worried that the northern borderline will use this as an excuse to attack Dongqing. Even if they don't fight, in your opinion, Will Prince Changsho collude with the northern borderline? Gu Xian could not help but fall into deep thought. He was a big merchant who did business in the north and south. Naturally, he was well informed. He knew about the sudden death of the princess of the northern borderline. Gu Xian asked, "Young master, do you think that once the war breaks out in the northern borderline, it will be difficult to do business?" Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "If the north borderline starts a war with Dongqing, it will definitely involve the entire country. Even if the noble ladies covet and want to buy a luxury item like glass, I reckon they will have to think twice. What's more, there's no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world." If they were sold slowly according to the previous price, they could earn at least 140 million strings of coins. What kind of concept was that? The national treasury of Dongqing in a normal year was only 150 million strings of coins. This was under the situation where there were no disasters in the country. If there were floods, droughts, earthquakes, or famine from time to time, the national treasury's annual revenue would be less than 90 million strings of coins. Jiang Pengji narrowed her eyes and said, "Uncle Gu, you can do it according to your own ideas. It's fine as long as you can get rid of them in the shortest time possible. You can exchange all these glass for silver or sheepskin. I don't care if you earn less. Without the northern borderline, we still have the 4 factions of Nanman to cheat. The faraway Zhongzhou, Beiyuan, Xichang, and even the southern mainland of Dongqing. They are all markets. We don't have to worry about not having a place to earn money. We can only earn more money in the future if we are willing to make a small profit." Gu Xian couldn't help but smile at Jiang Pengji's words. He felt more confident. "Young master, please rest assured. Your servant will definitely not disappoint you." Gu Xian solemnly bowed. In the past, he was grateful for Gu Min's appreciation of him. Now, he was convinced by Jiang Pengji's trust and generosity. He sighed in his heart. They were indeed mother and daughter. Jiang Pengji suddenly thought of something and instructed him. "Uncle Gu, after this business, you don't have to buy any more horses." Gu Xian was surprised. "Young master, why is that?" The horse farms in Dongqing were all in Song Prefecture. They had almost become the Ming's property. The previous generation of the Lu and Mings were somewhat despicable. It was basically impossible to buy good war horses from them. Even if it was possible, the money spent was not something Jiang Pengji could afford. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.